Eva's queen used the royal oath and received the authority to modify Earthlings' status windows.
This news spread through every city in less than 2 days, turning them upside down. As Earthlings were used to a freedom that came without any cost, they were all dumbfounded by the news. They were happily watching the fire from across the river, so it was no surprise that they were confused when the fire suddenly spread across the river and swept over them.
Of course, the ones who reacted the strongest were the Earthlings within Eva. Despite Charlotte Arya's strong declaration, they did not back down so easily. They mobbed the palace and protested every day. A small minority wondered if there would be a repetition of the past Harem civil war. However, their worry turned out to be unfounded. While it was true that the Harem royal family once attempted to do the same and failed to suppress the backlash of angry Earthlings, the current situation was totally different than the past. Harem in those days did not have a single backer and was surrounded by enemies on all sides. In contrast, the current Eva had the support of Paradise's strongest organization, as well as a group of other supporting organizations. That wasn't all. Influential organizations of other cities were maintaining their silence. Faced with this news, which was like a bolt out of the blue, ordinary Earthlings could say nothing to change the situation. At the end of the day, they were reaping what they sowed. They remained silent when Carpe Diem was attacked by an unknown group in the past. They remained silent when Valhalla attacked Paradise's influential organizations. And now, they were being attacked, but no one was left to stand up for them. Fuck. A man had gone to the royal palace to protest and complain today as well, but after being chased out without any gain, he threw his weapon on the ground angrily. He wanted to storm back in, strangle the queen, and force her to undo the changes, but he knew too well that his neck would be sent flying into the air the moment he stepped another foot into the palace. The man sighed and glanced at the people who had gone to protest alongside him. Today, there was a red-haired woman on duty, spinning a longsword in her hand while carefully watching their every move. Her eyes were gleaming with anticipation as she swallowed her saliva and watched just when they would cross the line. They were warned that if they came to bother the queen again with this problem, they would be made as examples of her new authority. It seemed like they had no choice but to accept this new change. "What should we do?" someone asked in a restless voice. There were at least a couple dozen people in the group, but no one was speaking out. "I guess we have no choice." After a long silence, the man spoke helplessly with a dejected expression. It really didn't seem like there was anything they could do to change the situation. It was then. What was that? A grumbling man spoke curtly. "If they're going to go ahead with this, then why don't we show them?" "Show them? Are you just going to sit still and do nothing? We've got to at least show them that we aren't retards." People's eyes widened at the man's outburst. "It's not like Eva is the only city." The man snorted. In a way, he was right. It wasn't like they were members of an organization that was rooted in Eva. Individual Earthlings that lived like vagabonds in inns could easily move to another city without incurring a huge loss. If they didn't like Eva and its new change, they could simply leave it. In truth, they knew that Charlotte Arya wasn't wrong. However, having something taken away always felt shitty. And when that something was a right they had been enjoying for free, they might understand with their heads but their feelings couldn't accept it. Yeah. Why don't we leave then? Let them be happy on their own. When one person agreed in a fit of anger, other people began to agree as well. That's right. If you can't stand the heat, you just have to get out of the kitchen. Let them beat the drum all they want. See if we care. Here. Let's show them that even a worm will turn if you step on them. They must think we're dogs that will bark at their every command. What was that? Leave? That brat, does she think we won't? People began to buzz, determined to leave Eva. A few of the more impatient ones immediately went back, packed their belongings, and signed contracts with carriages. Many Earthlings must have found the change unacceptable as there were hundreds of people who were loading their bags onto carriages.
Valhalla's representative sure is a rookie. A man got in a carriage and remarked with a relieved look. He's the perfect example of a child who grabbed hold of power by chance.
Yeah. Who cares if you're strong?
Does he think the royal families did nothing until now because they're idiots?
A man who got in the carriage with him commented as well. Just when people were starting to cheer him on, he does this. Anyway, I'm sure Scheherazade will be full of people from now on. It's better to be with traitors than to live as slaves. I can't wait until next week comes around.
The city will be empty.
And only the cold wind will blow on the streets.
Who knows?
Maybe he'll beg us to return. We're sorry. We'll withdraw the new changes, so please. Hell, I'm going to need more than that to change my mind. Maybe if the star of lust lets me have my way with her. Boisterous laughter burst out from the running carriage. Feeling better from having vented their rage, the man opened the carriage door. Egu, Eva, this is goodbye.
After muttering in a carefree manner with his head peeking out, he looked back. It was then. Ha! The man exclaimed as he stared at the city that had now become a tiny dot. What the heck is that? He shouted with a look of disbelief. What's up?
Wait.
Stop the carriage. What's wrong? The other man peeked his head out of the carriage and stared in the same direction as the first man. Then, he made the same dumbfounded face. There was a long march where the two men were staring.
Fallen angels, cave fairies, sky fairies, beastmen, and dwarves.
Why is the Federation here?
Indeed, the members of the Federation were marching in a long line. A long, endless line was headed towards Eva.
One of the men activated the archer-class basic skill, 1,000-mile eyes, and saw the foreign races laughing and chatting in an excited manner.
At the very least, it didn't look like they were coming to seize a city.
They looked more like a large-scale delegation that was on a cultural mission to establish friendly relations. What the hell's going on?
Oi! Turn the carriage back. Hurry!
A strange phenomenon occurred. Carriages that left the city turned around and began to return one by one. Charlotte Arya collapsed as soon as she returned to the palace after using the royal oath at the temple. Perhaps because she completely expended her mental energy, her body burned with a high fever for 2 days. Sol Jihu was protecting her by her side, nursing her all throughout the night. Drenched in sweat like someone doused in rainwater, she trembled like a leaf in a storm.
Sol Jihu soaked a towel with water before wringing the water out and carefully wiping Charlotte Arya's forehead.
I'm sorry.
Charlotte Arya muttered weakly as if she was ashamed of showing such a weak appearance.
Sol Jihu smiled silently. Charlotte Arya panted with hot breaths and then asked carefully. How was I?
Did I do well? It would be presumptuous for me to say. It's fine, so tell me. Sol Jihu smiled brightly and brought his face closer to Charlotte Arya's. You were incredibly cool. He whispered into her ears. And sexy.
Sexy? As in, beautiful to the point of provoking sexual pleasure?
Pong.
White steam popped out of Charlotte Arya's ears.
Insolent.
You dare to talk to a queen that way? Charlotte Arya's face flushed red, and she covered herself up with her blanket. Sol Jihu laughed quietly. At that moment, a messenger came with news of the Federation's arrival in Eva. However, Sol Jihu did not leave right away. He stayed by Charlotte Arya's side and gently caressed the blanket where her head should be placed. You can go if you want. Feeling his touch, Charlotte Arya peeked her head out of the blanket and murmured quietly.
Sol Jihu only chuckled and continued moving his hand.
Why are you laughing? Charlotte Arya pouted but closed her eyes at his gentle touch. Soon, her small nose let out faint breathing sounds. 1 hour later, Sol Jihu slowly took his hand off and got up.
Was Russell praising her in the dream world? Seeing Charlotte Arya grinning happily in her sleep, Sol Jihu quietly closed the door.
Members of the Federation visited a human city. The goal of the visit. First, as of today, Eva will formulate a restoration of relationships with the Federation. Going beyond a simple alliance, Eva will become a pillar of support for Tiggle Fortress and take on the role of mutual assistance with the Federation.
Was the fortification of Eva?
Going a step further, it was to discuss the cornerstone of the Federation and humanity's permanent partnership.
Here in this city called Eva.
The Federation's greatest advantage was the existence of the powerful Tiggle Fortress, but it was also their greatest weakness. Though it wasn't as if their other borders weren't secure, they weren't as fortified as Tiggle Fortress.
In other words, the moment Tiggle Fortress fell, it would only be a matter of time before the Federation's entire territory would be captured.
This would naturally bring about a huge disaster to humanity by expanding their battlefront. This wouldn't be a problem if Tiggle Fortress was truly an impregnable wall, but Tiggle Fortress had already been captured once. Judging this issue to be of high priority, the Federation's upper echelon had made a request to Sol Jihu after the end of the war 1 year ago. They wanted to inquire about fortifying Eva to the level of Tiggle Fortress and establishing a mutually cooperative relationship so that they would have a safe place to retreat to, should Tiggle Fortress be conquered again.
Of course, Sol Jihu had no reason to reject their offer. He was already concerned with how obsessed the Parasite Queen was in trying to take over Tiggle Fortress. It didn't seem like a bad idea to take this opportunity and make sure she would not even dream of touching Tiggle Fortress. In fact, he saw this as a necessity. And with things turning out this way, Eva's Earthlings leaving the city was none of his concern. Because even without them, the foreign races would live in Eva alongside humanity. And he knew very well that such cowardly Earthlings were far weaker and disloyal than the foreign races, who were brimming with hatred against the parasites. It wasn't just Eva either. Other cities would soon repeat Eva's proclamation, and members of the Federation would go to those cities as well. And so, Scheherazade would have to make a decision. Either to lower their head and follow the trend or to be destroyed. Sol Jihu walked while humming inwardly. The welcoming ceremony must have ended while he was putting Charlotte Arya to sleep, as he could see several foreign races walking about. Is this where we're going to live from now on? It'll be much safer here. Whoa. 2 young foxmen were holding each other's hand and exclaiming with hopeful looks. Upon closer look, Sol Jihu noticed they were Hario and Hea. He felt strange seeing members of the Federation running around inside a human city. People who did not know of the background story stared at them in a daze, and people who knew it came out to the streets and greeted the Federation members. It was like he was seeing a repeat of the festival at Tiggle Fortress the night before they left. Just as Sol Jihu smiled contentedly, his eyes shot open. Ah! He saw a striped puppy crossing the streets with its chin and tail standing tall. It seemed like it was enjoying being at the center of attention. Behind this striped puppy was a group of 6 white and yellow rice cakes. Pea puppy. Keying? They must have noticed Sol Jihu as they flinched. They then twinkled their tiny, beam-like eyes, stuck out their tongues, and came running while wagging their tails. Spin, spin. As the little fuzzballs began to circle around Sol Jihu's legs, Sol Jihu's eyes spun as well. When the black striped rice cake stood on its hind legs and nudged his calf, he couldn't help himself any longer. "Ya little nuggets! Who told you to be so cute?" Sol Jihu shouted inwardly before instantly bending down and hugging the tiny fuzzballs that were hopping around in joy. "I wanted to see you guys so much. You have no idea how much I missed your fur and fat." Fur? Fat? The little fuzzballs tilted their heads, but seeing how delighted Sol Jihu was to see them, they licked his face. While they were rubbing their faces together, a dry cough rang out. Yo!
A largely built foreign race individual with a mane around his face, the Beastman King White Tiger, raised his hand and gave an awkward greeting. Sol Jihu turned his face, which was still buried in the fuzzballs, and sent the Beastman King a fierce glance.
I have a favor to ask of you. It's been a… Can I hold on to these guys for a bit?
It's fine even if it's only when I sleep.
White Tiger blinked in a fluster. Then, ho! How bold! He looked like he was impressed. To say such a thing on sight. I suppose it's okay. As a hero and a male, such spirit is only natural. Fine. I shall allow you to sleep with my daughter. White Tiger guffawed joyfully. I'm not a particularly strict parent anyway.
But try to hold off for a few months.
I want to see my grandkids too, but you should wait at least until she reaches adulthood.
Sol Jihu had no idea what was going on, but he was happy to know that he could stay with the little fuzzballs. You're getting ready to mate so soon?
At that moment, Gabriel appeared while throwing her silver hair back. Ah! Sol Jihu finally came to his senses, though he held onto the struggling fuzzballs tighter. Welcome. It's been about an hour since we arrived. I should have come out to greet you. Sorry.
The queen is a little sick.
It's fine. Eva's royal administrator treated us well.
I saw her speech too.
To be honest, it made me see her in a new light. Tell her it was an excellent speech befitting of the position of queen.
Gabriel smiled.
Anyway, thank you. It was getting crowded. There's finally some space to breathe.
Right, the Federation's territory was smallest among Paradise's 3 forces. 5 races were living together in what should only be enough for only 1 or 2 races to live in, so it was impossible for the Federation not to be crowded. The Beastman race had once decreased in population to the point that extinction was a real concern, but thanks to a few species being so fertile, they had regained their past prosperity to a degree. Only, the period between pregnancy and birth wasn't long, and a single mother might give birth to 8 or even 12 babies at once. Since beastmen grew quickly, it was good for the Federation, which was in need of soldiers, but as there had been no serious wars for the past year, they had been in need of new territory to handle their exploding population. Anyway, if you're that sorry, just open a few more cities for us later. Gabriel smiled. Don't worry. There's a great place called Harem. Harem isn't bad. Though, we should first properly settle into Eva and show that we can be of help. Gabriel smacked her lips in the middle of talking. Sol Jihu tilted his head. Why? Is there a problem? I wouldn't call it a problem, but I do need to ask for your understanding. Gabriel smiled bitterly and explained. Once she finished, Sol Jihu hurriedly walked to Valhalla's building, where he saw a group of stumpy people gathered together. It was the dwarves. They all had uncomfortable looks on their faces. Vidalov, the dwarven king, was especially so. He wasn't just showing his displeasure. He was looking around in all directions with a bright face while his hands were shaking uncontrollably like a patient with an obsessive-compulsive disorder. Was he like that before? Sol Jihu recalled Vidalov being calm and collected at the meeting. Ah! There he comes. A few of the dwarves who recognized Sol Jihu ran up. Oh hero, our king is furious. What happened? Did someone do something? No, our king is angry because of this city. The dwarf shook his head. Pardon my manners, but those city walls and this building. How can you build them like this? How? Just how? Seeing how much they were at a loss for words, it seemed they received quite a culture shock from seeing buildings that humans built. Next, the dwarf grabbed Sol Jihu's arms and pleaded. Could this building be where our hero lives? Sol Jihu nodded his head unwittingly. Oh no! Then may we ask for a favor? A favor? Let us remodel his building. The dwarf shouted. With a building of this size, it should only take us a few days.
So please. We understand that we might be coming off as unreasonable, but please try to understand our side. We, especially our king, are of the mindset that everything that is handmade should be perfect.
From what Gabriel said, the dwarves were a race that, if 3 white bricks were aligned when building the left wall, they would not be content until the right side was also aligned with 3 white bricks, all without the slightest error. Despite the sudden request, Sol Jihu put on a serious face.
He empathized with Vidalov.
He also measured exactly 550 milliliters of water when making ramen.
Not even 550.0001 milliliters was acceptable. He measured 550 milliliters with pinpoint accuracy.
This was the spirit of a master craftsman. Though it might not seem like much, insignificant details were often the difference between an average creation and a masterpiece.
When it came to making noodles,
Sol Jihu's talent went beyond a simple genius to the level of an extraordinary genius. As such, he could empathize with Vidalov, who was titled God's blacksmith.
It would be my honor. Thank you.
The dwarf's complexion instantly brightened, and he turned around in a hurry. Soon, Vidalov extended his hand out like a general commanding his men to charge forward.
You-wa! Iya!
The entourage of dwarves took out their tools and charged toward Valhalla's building, roaring.
Clank, clank!
Swinging their tools at frightening speeds, they began to remodel the building as if to destroy something that should not exist in this world. What's going on?
Phi Sora rushed out with her longsword at the sudden warcry and looked around.
SSSK, SSSK.
Seeing the dwarves starting their remodeling from the garden,
she made a dumbfounded face.
We're in the process of fortifying Eva.
Sol Jihu spoke casually.
Huh. I thought you were going to repair the walls or something. Buildings also.
We're going to modify all buildings into ancient golems that can fight in times of emergency.
What?
This is the first time I've heard of this.
Is that even possible?
Think of Tiggle Fortress structure.
Their entire walls can move. What's to say the Federation can't create some golems? Ah! Now that you mention it.
Phi Sora stamped her left palm with her right fist.
Sol Jihu glanced at her awkwardly. She was just too easy to trick.
With this, Valhalla's building will be going through an evolution. All we have to do is watch. Sol Jihu spoke solemnly.
Then.
Anyway, they said it won't take long. Why don't we enjoy these guys and wait? He grabbed one of the fuzzballs in his embrace and chomped down on its plump stomach.
Keying.
A satisfied smile bloomed on Sol Jihu's face.
This was the taste he had been longing for. As Sol Jihu nibbled, the striped fuzzball flailed from being tickled.
What are you doing?
Phi Sora looked at him weirdly, and Sol Jihu handed her a yellow rice cake. Try biting down.
They're delicious.
Delicious.
What?
You're going to incur divine punishment.
Phi Sora took the yellow rice cake in bewilderment and blinked.
Who are you? The little fuzzball was panting while twinkling its curious black eyes. She had to admit, it was adorable.
When she came to her senses, she found herself lightly biting down on the fuzzball's fluffy yellow fur. Oh!
Phi Sora's eyes widened. This is great. So soft and warm like a rice cake you just took out of the steamer. Right?
It's the kind of taste you want to hold on to at all times.
Sol Jihu bit down on a white rice cake that was squirming to save its friend. Peeved. Meanwhile, Phi Sora blew on the yellow rice cake's stomach. Keying. The white and yellow rice cakes shook strongly before drooping down like rags. Some organizations surrendered to Valhalla, while others disappeared overnight. The Federation decided to settle down in Eva. Those who heard the news were baffled as they had not expected the Federation to come forth in these chaotic times. Only a few of them realized that Valhalla had deliberately raised the stakes in the conflict that followed the recent terror incident.
The Federation's intervention would certainly help settle the chaos that seemed to be growing day by day. Gabriel had been watching the situation for a while and understood the role Valhalla expected the Federation to play. So she made several significant remarks in public. She stressed the need to fortify Eva, thanked Valhalla and the royal family of Eva for their forgiveness and acceptance, and promised to lend support to Eva, which she knew would become the Federation's loyal partner in the future. Gabriel also announced that the Federation considered not only Eva but all the cities and humans as friends, and would welcome other cities that sought its technological prowess with open arms as long as they agreed to abide by certain conditions. Her speech became the subject of people's debate. Not many people knew this, but just the fact that Vidalov, the leader of the dwarves who rarely appeared in public, came to Eva indicated that the Federation's sincerity in resolving the current conflict was genuine.
And of course, the conditions that Gabriel mentioned had everything to do with the recent incident. Sol Jihu went out to walk the fuzzballs and took a stroll around the city. The streets of Eva were as lively as ever.
This is amazing.
I can't believe you made such delicate and precise engravings with only your hands.
HMPH.
I'm just a trainee.
Also, can't you see that I'm busy?
Go away. You could get hurt. A man stood in amazement near the construction site where the dwarves were busy tearing down buildings and rebuilding them from scratch. Ah, I'm sorry.
Wait, did you just say you're a trainee?
No way. I've been in the construction business for more than 20 years, and let me just say, your skills are far too amazing for a trainee.
HMPH.
20 years is nothing. And don't make me laugh.
The master blacksmiths are on their way here, and when you see their work you'll want to take back what you just said.
Are really? Do you mind if I watch? I won't bother them.
I'll even run errands for them. HMPH.
Didn't I just say it's dangerous here?
If you really want to help, go sit under the shade over there and bring us some beer during the break. The young dwarf's tone was blunt, but not malicious. Rather, he seemed flattered by the human's praise, made apparent by the smile tugging at the corner of his lips.
Sol Jihu watched the dwarf and the human and nodded before moving on.
The construction site wasn't the only place where exchanges between the Federation and humanity were taking place.
On the street, an Earthling woman took a piece of chocolate out of her pocket and carefully handed it to a crying Foxman child in his mother's arms.
The Foxman child, drawn to the sweet scent, stopped at once and began sniffing, his eyes wide open. The child licked the chocolate on the woman's palm as if he had never tasted one before. As a huge smile spread across the child's face, the mother thanked the woman, who then waved shyly at the child. Those who were watching couldn't help but smile.
Sol Jihu, too,
smiled softly and continued down the street.
They really are amazing. Looking down at the neatly paved sidewalk, Sol Jihu was filled with awe. The dwarves began with construction the day they arrived in Eva. Worried that the dwarves might overexert themselves, Sol Jihu had suggested they rest a few days before starting work. But the answer he received from the dwarf craftsman was unexpected. "You want us to rest in this building? Don't make me laugh. I know you said that out of consideration for us, but do you have any idea how we feel right now? It's like we have a diary full of our embarrassing secrets spread wide open on the table for everyone to read. In other words, we can't stop thinking about it. There's no way we can rest knowing that the diary is still out there, so we'd rather take care of it first." Sol Jihu no longer felt the need to stop them when he saw the satisfied looks on their faces after they had taken all the bricks off from the sidewalk, polished them, then put them back one by one. In any case, thanks to the meticulous nature and delicate skills of the dwarves, Eva became more and more beautiful day by day. Of course, they couldn't have repaired 80% of all roads in a week without the Eastern Spring merchants, who provided them with the necessary resources, and the royal family of Eva, who opened up the pre-secured territories, including the royal sites, to the members of the Federation. In addition, the Sky Ferry's shop was due to open in about 2 days,
thanks to the huge wealth Sol Jihu had offered Eva. Kim Hana worried that the change might be too radical but nevertheless did not oppose it. She knew that the success of Sol Jihu's plan depended on how well the Federation adapted to Eva and how prosperous Eva became. Still, after a tour of the city, Sol Jihu, standing in front of Valhalla's front gate, smiled bitterly.
They didn't have to make them so big and magnificent.
The Valhalla building was huge from the start, but now its splendor was comparable to the Taj Mahal after the dwarves added various ornaments to it.
What's that? Sol Jihu frowned while looking around the construction site.
Vidalif was carving a huge stone statue in the garden by himself. He seemed completely focused on his work as he moved his hands with the utmost caution, sweating profusely. The statue seemed like it would be a good addition to the garden, but somehow it looked familiar. The statue was of a man holding a spear, bending his arm back above his head.
Wait.
Is that me?
Sol Jihu began to blink rapidly.
He couldn't be sure with just the hair and the face, but the spear of purity and other equipment were definite giveaways. The dwarf was most definitely carving a statue of Sol Jihu, aiming his spear at the parasite queen. There was no way Sol Jihu could stop him now. Sol Jihu's face turned red.
Damn it.
Of all the models he could have chosen, why did he choose me? He shook his head and looked down at the rice cakes with a sigh. Hey, rainbow rice cake.
You agree with me, right?
Keying? The white rice cake with black stripes tilted its head.
Asterisk.
Haremark's most popular pub, eat, drink, and enjoy was bustling with people as always. Valhalla's been annoying lately. A man sitting at a log table grumbled softly, pouring liquor into his cup. They want to manage our settings?
Are they really Earthlings like us? I just don't understand why they're supporting Eva. He emptied the contents of his cup into his mouth and frowned. I mean, isn't their target Sinyoung?
Why should we suffer in the process?
Two other men at the same table nodded in agreement. And now the Federation wants to settle in Eva. I have no idea what's going on anymore. I don't know.
Aside from everything else, the fact that the Federation wants to settle in Eva. I don't think that's such a bad thing. When the man complained again, the only woman at the table of four remarked carefully.
One of the men looked at her, as if he had just remembered something.
That's right, you said you visited Eva the other day. How was it?
Hoo-hoo.
Get ready to have your mind blown away. With a grin, the woman took off the bow on her back and placed it on the table, as if she had been waiting for this question.
The men widened their eyes.
Oh. You changed your bow?
The day I arrived in Eva was the day the Sky Fairies shop opened up. I was curious, so I went to take a look and ended up buying some of their stuff.
Is this bow any good?
You have no idea. My old bow doesn't even compare to it. You see, the wooden part of this bow is made from the branches of the world tree.
What?
Surprised, You know that the world tree is a sacred ash tree, right?
When you fix an arrow on this bow, it's instantly infused with an anti-evil attribute that has a very powerful effect on the parasites, not to mention undead monsters. So how could I resist? The woman beamed and the man exclaimed in amazement.
Wow! It must have been expensive. No, it actually wasn't as expensive as I'd expected.
Really?
Yeah. It did cost more than the longbow but was still very affordable. They didn't deliberately break the world tree's branches, but only used branches that had naturally fallen during its growth. And I got a grand opening discount, too. Is this all you got? Of course not.
The next thing she showed them was her quiver, and inside it were arrows with colorful feathers.
Ta-da! Take a look.
These arrows have been infused with the power of the spirits. Spirits?
Yup.
It's made from fallen angels' feathers infused with the five spirits' power.
With this, I can shoot fire arrows and wind arrows like magicians do.
So, what do you think?
Pretty cool, huh?
The eyes of the men looking at the bow and arrows began to glow with admiration.
But my biggest achievement. The woman was far from done. She grabbed a particularly long arrow from the quiver and carefully held it up for everyone to see.
Is this?
This is a limited edition arrow.
They only had 10 in stock. They held an impromptu archery competition and allowed only the top 10 customers to purchase one arrow each.
I managed to secure one by placing ninth.
There was something ominous about the way the arrowhead glowed blue under the light.
The man gave a light chuckle.
Why is this such a big deal?
I see the arrowhead is blue.
Oh, it's thunder. What?
The man's eyes shot open and he quickly pulled himself back.
The other two did the same.
The woman burst into laughter and waved a hand.
Don't be scared. It's made from the same material but safe.
Quote. There's only a little bit mixed in the arrowhead, so technically it's not even a thunder. Still. The woman smiled and carefully rubbed the arrowhead with her thumb. In terms of destructive power,
it doesn't even compare to the other arrows.
Hit a weak spot, and even a Medusa will explode. She raised the arm holding the arrow in a shooting position. One visit to Eva, and you're head over heels for it.
The man who was the first to complain said nonchalantly.
Maybe you should just move there. The woman paused. With a sigh,
she carefully placed the arrow back into the quiver. Why do you have to say it like that?
Don't you know that what you're doing right now is helping them? First, you visit Eva, and now you're advertising their merchandise.
How could you, with everything that's going on? Are you out of your mind? Why would I be out of my mind?
I'm just expressing satisfaction with what I bought. Should I be lying about how I feel? The woman said in a firm voice. And technically, Valhalla did nothing wrong.
I never said they did. But why are they meddling with our? That's because Seinen is doing nothing to root out humanity's defectors.
Recent events have proven that there are traitors among us, and I believe they should be eradicated. Wow! Who could have imagined that one visit to Eva would make you a Valhalla advocate? I'm not their advocate. I'm just saying they're pretty reasonable. The man mocked, but the woman remained calm. And the 7 gods designated only criminals as targets for the setting's evaluations. We haven't committed any crime, and we never will. So this doesn't affect us. The woman shrugged.
HMPH.
Except we will.
They're saying if we don't respond to their draft call, we'll be branded as criminals.
The man snorted. That's true.
But their decision does make sense.
She put her hand on the new bow.
After a moment of hesitation, she spoke with a sigh.
Actually, well, I haven't decided for sure, but I'm thinking of joining the war.
What?
I've been thinking about it for a while.
You're right.
I might have changed after visiting Eva. The woman continued. We've been stuck at level 4 for some time now. Are we going to stay like this forever? Level 5s get a completely different treatment. Shouldn't we aim for high rank before it's too late?
Before it's too late?
Yes, before it's too late. The woman cleared her throat. Listen.
From now on, Paradise will revolve around Eva and other cities that accept the Federation.
Why?
Because of this.
She tapped on the bow and the quiver. Remember what it was like to buy new equipment until now? Every time we leveled up, the price of equipment soared. But from now on, better equipment will be sold at a much lower price. We don't have to cave in to Valhalla to buy Eva's weapons. It's not like there's a limit to who can buy and who can't. Sure, there might be cherry pickers like you.
But what about the others?
Even I'm convinced that this is a sweet deal.
Can you be sure there are no more people like me?
The man didn't seem particularly impressed.
His expression remained flat.
The situation has never been better.
Humanity's been winning against the parasites for years and now the Federation is with us.
More and more people will join the war, seeing that there is hope for victory.
So you're saying we should cave in to Valhalla's demands?
I'm just saying that we should go along for the ride.
You guys do know that the easiest way to earn contribution points is through war, right?
The three men nodded in unison. Well, just think about it.
There are many more like us stuck at level 4. What if half of those people join the war, and 10% of them become high rankers?
The woman stopped and shifted her gaze from side to side.
One of the men, the quick-witted one, stiffened immediately.
Do you think even then high rankers will be treated the way they are now?
No, because it's only natural that demand decreases as supply increases. Currently, level 5 is considered an ace in any organization, but its value will drop in the future. An upturn in the skills of Earthlings. Not to mention level 4s, even level 5s were likely to lose value. The leaders of most cities are already following Valhalla. Because for them, opening up their cities is much more advantageous whether we like it or not.
The woman swallowed hard.
Scheherazade is still resisting, of course, but who knows what kind of decision Sinyoung will make. And, even if Scheherazade doesn't change, all that's waiting for them down the road is destruction. Some fish stay in small rivers while others travel to the sea. Those heading to the sea naturally become strong in the face of many adversaries, while those remaining in the river do not change. Just like how Valhalla became stronger than Sinyoung.
Do you think even then we'll be able to enjoy paradise as we do now? I don't. People are going to look down on us for not participating in the war, and we'll probably struggle to get a seat in expeditions as well. We'll be walking on eggshells the entire time.
The two men seemed convinced by the woman's words.
The remaining man, who was the first to complain, lowered his head.
I understand what you're trying to say. After a moment of silence, he spoke in a slightly softer tone.
But joining the war is a bit. I was told that the parasite queen and the army commanders were all gods.
How can ordinary humans like us kill gods? The woman smiled as she realized what the man was worried about.
I understand. Participating in the war is in itself a risk. But do we really have to take more risks than we can afford?
You're right.
How can humans beat gods? So we should just avoid them from the start.
The man looked at the woman with a dumbfounded look on his face. Do you get what I'm saying? Why should we fight them? There's an Earthling who's already killed an army commander, and there are plenty of strong people in the Federation.
The woman raised her hands and continued. We should let monsters fight other monsters while we deal with enemies that fit our level. I mean, we can easily beat the lowest ranked species even now.
And if we had more weapons like this?
I think we can defeat even stronger ones.
And if by any chance, my arrow actually does hit a Medusa.
With the thunder arrow in her hand, the woman trembled and her eyes sparkled.
These are from the Sky Fairies shop, but soon the dwarves, cave fairies, and beastmen will also open up shops of their own. What do you think?
So. The man smacked his lips.
We should move to Eva?
Nah.
I'm just saying we should go together.
I don't think moving there will be necessary.
Quote.
See, I heard this rumor from a reliable source. The woman signaled her comrades to gather. The three men leaned close to the woman. The next city to be opened up is likely to be Harem.
What?
But isn't Harem controlled by Sicilia? Geez.
Don't you know that the day Valhalla announced its position, the leader of Sicilia flew to Eva immediately to butter up Valhalla?
Really? You really are oblivious. Do you know they even cut off ties with an ally organization?
And Chinzia has already negotiated with Haramark to accept Valhalla's terms as long as they limit their supervision to criminals.
I can't believe Sicilia. It was only a few years ago that they started a civil war because they didn't like the royal family. The situation has changed.
They've been steadily involved in wars since becoming a representative organization.
I'm sure they're glad that Valhalla stepped in this time. The woman lowered her voice further.
Anyway, the next city to open will either be Oder or Haramark. Rumor has it that Princess Teresa has been staying in Eva lately, and she's trying to convince Valhalla's representative to choose Haramark. The woman whispered as if she was confiding a big secret, and the three men kept nodding their heads. But one thing that the woman did not know was that the rumor she knew had been deliberately spread by someone. In short, it was an open secret, as evidenced by the fact that the usually noisy pub was full of whispers today. Earthlings were agonizing over the things they had never thought about before. This was a prelude to humanity's change. A month had passed since the Federation settled in Eva. It was still too early to determine the success of the plan, but so far everything was going smoothly. The Federation had successfully integrated as part of the human city, and the streets of Eva were busy day after day with tourists and Earthlings coming to shop. And today there was an announcement that Oder and Harem would open simultaneously. Alone in her office, Yun Seahui buried her face in her hands. Those who knew her would have known that this was a rare sight. But her reaction was understandable. Even she hadn't expected the Federation to join Eva. Previously, she was confident that Xinjiang could hold out. Now? Not so much. But that wasn't the only thing she hadn't expected. It's way too fast. The pace at which Eva was changing was too fast. This meant that the opponent had been preparing this plan for at least a year. For Xinjiang, it was a sneak attack, but for Valhalla, this was something they had been preparing for a long time. Yun Seahui could no longer deny that she was in trouble. The Federation and its technological prowess were undoubtedly a tempting bait. If it were another time, she would have asked them to let Scheherazade join. However, Xinjiang's status wasn't exactly great at the moment. Many Earthlings were pinning the blame on Xinjiang for the royal family's prosperity. They argued that this would not have happened if Xinjiang had announced its position early on or had not planned the incident in the first place. Now Xinjiang couldn't even dream of rivaling Valhalla. At this rate, even number 2 would be a luxury. Xinjiang would become one of many mundane organizations out there. Just as Valhalla overtook Xinjiang in just 2 years, this was sure to happen. If she did nothing, Xinjiang would fall behind. She had to do something before it was too late. Something that will enable Xinjiang to regain its former glory. Yun Seahui had never been much of a risk-taker, but right now she had no choice. She put her hand on the communication crystal and called her secretary. Not long after, a young man, not the HR director, entered her office, stiff with tension. "You called me?" "Contact." Yun Seahui bit her lip, exhaled her breath, and started again. "Contact Valhalla." "Pardon?" Yun Seahui raised her head in a flash. She hated repeating herself. "I said, contact Valhalla. We need to talk." A cold wind blew inside the office. A shiver went down the young man's spine. He could tell that something wasn't right. Yun Seahui, who was well known for her ever-smiling face and gentle manner of speech, was angry. Instinctively sensing danger, the young man replied without taking so much time as to think. Why yes. I'll contact them right away through the communication crystal." Yun Seahui shut her eyes. Because the HR director Jung Minjiang was in disciplinary confinement, she had chosen a temporary secretary to fill his place. But to think he did not even know the difference between using a communication crystal and sending a messenger in paradise. Or was he mistakenly thinking that Xinjiang's position was still the same as in the past? No, don't call them. Write up an official document and respectfully deliver it through a messenger. As Yun Seahui spoke coldly, the young man lowered his head in a fluster. "Why yes, ma'am. Messenger. I understand. Where's Director Jung? He's staying in his mansion on Earth. We're keeping a close eye on him. And what about manager Yun Seora? Lady Yun Seora is." The young man trailed off. Yun Seahui shook her head. Then, she shooed him away as if talking any longer would be a waste of time. The young man scurried out of the office. Talk. The door quietly closed behind him. Yun Seahui let out a deep sigh. What's wrong with me?
She had failed to control her emotions and ended up lashing out. In the past, she did not show it outwardly no matter how angry she was on the inside. This just went to show how shaken she was.
Yun Seohui sat dazedly for a long time before glancing down.
She reached out and opened the lower drawer of her desk, which she did not open more than 4 times a year.
After taking out a pack of cigarettes, she picked out a thin cigarette and bit down on it.
Looking into the air with relaxed eyes, she lit the cigarette. Sure. From her thin, pale lips.
I don't see a reason not to bend down.
For now. Rather than a thin, long puff of smoke, a short and thick puff of smoke spread out. Asterisk.
Same time. The parasite's grand hall was filled with a bone-chilling tension. The 6 army commanders were bowing their heads in prostration. As always, the parasite queen was sitting on the corrupted throne where their admiration was directed, emanating more intense energy from her body than usual. What was that? That Sol Jihu said what?
A harsh voice shook the air.
To honor the memory of the parasite's 4th army commander, Raging Temperance.
As the parasite queen asked doubtfully, the army commanders bowed deeper in shame. Twisted Kindness glared at the ground with bloodshot eyes and clenched her fists hard.
Chapter mid.
Ha!
The parasite queen burst out with empty laughter that was closer to a lamentation. After sensing the change in the celestial bodies, the parasite queen summoned the army commanders and heard what had happened while she was asleep. Realizing that the external state of affairs suddenly changed, she tasked them to find out the detailed reason.
And once she heard Vulgar Chassidy's report, she felt her insides twist.
Those worthless insects acting on their own was frustrating enough, but that damned human had even taunted the parasites so openly.
Honoring the memory of the deceased great general despite being enemies?
That damned brat! The parasite queen's trembling voice echoed out. What vexed her more was the fact that there was nothing she could do about it at the moment.
Neither she nor her 6 army commanders were in a condition to fight.
They were only now approaching a full recovery. In truth, the parasite queen had expected some change to happen while she and her army commanders were immobilized.
Since she lost a mutual, all-out war, she considered it as something that she had to bear. But this situation. Phew!
The parasite queen barely calmed herself down and slowly closed her eyes.
It was still too early to discuss victory and defeat.
Though the situation had changed greatly, the scale was still tipped in their favor. The problem was that this scale started to move toward the other side, despite looking like it wouldn't change for eternity. An even bigger problem was that the parasites had lost when it was at a position of such an overwhelming advantage. Before the Tiggle Fortress War, the parasite queen had an ominous sense of foreboding. That if they lost the war, they would only be left with just one chance.
And her prediction had come true.
Forcefully drawn by the attraction of the brightest star, humanity had begun to orbit a proper path. And to make matters worse, the Federation had appropriately joined their course. With this, the parasites no longer had a place to fall back to.
She felt like all bridges were burned.
Meaning, if they lost another huge war, that would be the end.
The brightest star.
The parasite queen sighed as she slumped down on the throne.
I should have gotten rid of him in the Valley War.
Hearing her monologue, the army commanders all looked grief-stricken. They had no words to say and no excuses to give. However, one person had an aloof expression from the beginning to end. As if he didn't like this atmosphere, he slowly raised his head and looked up at the throne.
Your Majesty. He slowly put his hand up and spoke.
There's something I'm curious about.
Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket.
You see, when I was a human, I just couldn't wrap my head around why you left humanity alone despite having the power to raise them to the ground and why you were so hell-bent on taking down Tiggle Fortress.
Sung Shi-hyun shrugged.
Of course, I know you must have had your reasons. You're a god, after all.
I'm sure there was something outside of my understanding or something specific you were aiming for. That aside,
Sung Shi-hyun paused briefly before continuing.
There is something that I haven't been able to understand even after turning to the parasite's side.
What is it?
What is the brightest star?
Sung Shi-hyun asked. Sol Ji-hoo. Isn't he just a human? What is so special about this brightest star that makes your majesty shudder like this?
The army commanders all turned to Sung Shi-hyun in shock.
To dare to say their supreme queen would shudder.
It was just too irreverent.
The parasite queen didn't reply right away. After a long silence, she said,
I suppose it is better to see once than to hear 100 times. Come closer.
The parasite queen got up from the throne and beckoned Sung Shi-hyun. Sung Shi-hyun got up immediately and walked forward.
Step by step, he approached the throne and climbed the stairs leading up to the queen. Then, at last, he arrived in front of her. It was then. Sung Shi-hyun's field of vision changed completely. No, in an instant, the space he was standing in warped.
From the imperial palace's grand hall to a starlight-embroidered galaxy.
Whoa! How can stars? Aha! This large planet must be paradise.
It's kind of amazing looking at it like this. Sung Shi-hyun exclaimed in awe while looking down at his feet.
Why are you showing me outer space all of a sudden? The parasite queen pointed in a direction instead of replying.
When Sung Shi-hyun reflexively turned, his eyes lit up.
He saw a blue dot that was shining brightly.
It was then. Is that? Sung Shi-hyun's body shook violently as soon as he stared at it. His excitement and intrigue evaporated in an instant as his eyes widened in shock.
Ear.
He convulsed without being able to finish his sentence. Eventually, he fell to his knees, gasping for breath.
Was he swallowed by the terror of the universe?
A few seconds was all it took for his arrogant face to turn pale in fear. How is it? Can you see the? Oh! The parasite queen exclaimed in admiration after seeing Sung Shi-hyun gasping for breath. What she had pointed to should not be visible to most high-ranked species, much less a human's eyes. But Sung Shi-hyun's reaction clearly showed that he had seen it.
This could only be interpreted as one thing.
Sung Shi-hyun had gone beyond fully absorbing Undying Diligence's divinity and reached the point of having complete control over it. The sight should be visible to anyone with the rank of godhood, and that included demigods as well. How surprising.
How long has it been?
This time, it was Sung Shi-hyun who did not reply.
No, he couldn't. He was subconsciously flailing his legs to push himself back. He was in no state of mind to think about giving a reply.
Then, as Sung Shi-hyun began to well up with tears, the parasite queen decided it was enough and lightly waved her hand.
The world changed once again. The surrounding scenery returned to the grand hall from outer space.
Despite this, Sung Shi-hyun still had not come to his senses. Tell me what you saw. At the parasite queen's command, Sung Shi-hyun muttered with heavy breaths.
T2 red giants, 1 white giant. And an even bigger red supergiant, 1 blue supergiant. And.
Sung Shi-hyun stammered, failing to speak clearly. I don't know. As he narrowly spat out a breath, tears streamed down his face and dropped to the ground. Half of it is light, but the other half is darkness akin to a black hole. They were mixed together and raging violently.
Opening square bracket ellipsis dot closing square bracket. Then I felt like it suddenly looked at me, and laughed mockingly.
Sung Shi-hyun bent over, unable to continue his description. What?
What is that?
Why does Earth have? The indescribable terror he felt could only be imagined by the way he buried his face on the ground, crying. The parasite queen didn't blame him.
It was normal for him to be shocked after seeing something that would make even the sun pale in comparison. However, The army commanders, who weren't privy to the details,
could only make wry expressions. The proud, arrogant Sung Shi-hyun was crying. Just what the hell could he have seen? Looks like you got a proper look. The parasite queen placed her hand on his head. As she imbued her energy into him, his shaking subsided.
Supernova. A large nova that is millions or even billions of times brighter than an ordinary star.
I call this nova, the brightest star. Sung Shi-hyun, who had unknowingly stopped crying, looked up. The brightest star. An infinite star with a growth speed and potential that not even a god can estimate. Can you guess what will happen if this star gets involved in a human's fate? Sung Shi-hyun shook his head with a dazed face.
I'm sure you can't. I was the same. I encountered the star mixed with light and darkness long ago and suffered a humiliating defeat. I had courted disaster myself.
But a few years ago, the same star as that star of chaos appeared in paradise.
The parasite queen continued.
As I said before, the most frightening thing about that star is its limitless potential and frightening growth rate.
Once it explodes with light, it expands in size while evolving at a terrifying speed. In the time you do a double take, this star surpasses everyone's expectations and shoots forward.
By then, it would be too late to catch up to it. That is the reason I am so fearful and wary of the brightest star. Sung Shi-hyun gulped. Does this answer your question?
Yes.
Sung Shi-hyun wiped his teary eyes and staggered up.
I understand now. So. He collected his breath and spoke. We need to get rid of that star before it becomes unreachable.
Exactly. The star that is in paradise.
It hasn't evolved like that star I just saw, has it?
Not yet.
I see. I understand. Sung Shi-hyun breathed out a long sigh. He calmed down a bit and spoke. Please excuse me. There was something I wanted to tell you, but my mind's a mess after seeing what I just saw. It seems I will need to modify my plan completely.
Your plan? The parasite queen glanced up at the celestial bodies.
She had shown it to him on a whim, but a rather interesting event was unfolding.
Sung Shi-hyun's star was billowing. He seemed to have realized something after seeing the martial god's true self.
I need some time to organize my thoughts and do research. I will request an audience later. All right?
The parasite queen nodded her head generously.
I will look forward to the plan you will bring to the table, First Army Commander, Sung Shi-hyun. Go ahead and rest. The rest of you may leave as well. The eyes of the 5 army commanders widened.
The parasite queen's wrath suddenly subsiding was surprising enough. But she said she would be looking forward to his plan as well?
Sung Shi-hyun bowed and walked out of the grand hall.
His cold eyes were burning with unknown hostility.
Asterisk. It was a peaceful day in Eva today as always.
After returning to the Temple of Luxuria, Seo Yuhui carried out an organizational reform, and when she came back to Eva, she was deeply moved. Only a month or two had passed since she left, but Eva had changed so much in the right direction. That wasn't all. Valhalla's building, which resembled a skyscraper, had transformed into a beautiful white palace, and there was an imposing statue at the entrance that was very obviously modeled after Seoul Jihu. What caught Seo Yuhui's attention the most was the group of fuzzballs running around joyously near the lush, green garden lake.
As a lover of all things cute, there was simply no way Seo Yuhui would pass by them.
She grabbed a yellow rice cake that was approaching her with curiosity and placed it down on her lap. When she stroked it gently, it closed its eyes, feeling good. It was cute, acting just like Seoul Jihu. Speaking of the devil, she could see Seoul Jihu walking down the stairs while rubbing his drowsy eyes.
Jihu!
Happy to see him, Seo Yuhui waved her hand.
Seoul Jihu opened his eyes. I am back. Come here. Seo Yuhui tapped her right thigh as if she had been dying to see him. Seoul Jihu silently trudged over, still half asleep. Quote.
Then, in a half-conscious state, he looked down at the yellow rice cake that was taking up half of his spot. He grabbed its wagging tail and pulled it to the side before falling flat on his face and taking over the entirety of Seo Yuhui's lap. Seo Yuhui smiled bitterly.
King.
Yellow rice cake whimpered, having been chased out while it was enjoying a wonderful sleep. But after seeing Sol Jihu, it scurried up to him and dug into his embrace.
Oh my! Seo Yuhui blinked. Seeing Sol Jihu and yellow rice cake sleeping in peace, a smile bloomed on her face. Things couldn't be more peaceful. She stroked the two of them gently and prayed inwardly.
I pray this happiness will continue forever.
Of course, she knew it was only wishful thinking with the parasites still existing. Coincidentally, a messenger arrived at that time. Sinyoung very politely wrote how much they wanted to meet with them and talk. Kim Hana reported the matter to Sol Jihu immediately, and Sol Jihu shot up from Seo Yuhui's lap. Sinyoung had finally raised the white flag. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With the end in sight, there was no reason to delay the matter any longer. The meeting place would be the Scheherazade Royal Palace. Sol Jihu immediately summoned Valhalla's members, held a meeting, and ordered everyone to prepare to leave for Scheherazade. Representative. Before their departure, Kim Hana asked for a private meeting with Sol Jihu. If it is all right with you, I plan to install a safety net for Representative ahead of the meeting. Would that be okay? Safety net? Yes, it would include various things. Sinyoung sent their messenger because they are backed into a corner. There's no telling what they will do. Well, if they don't show propriety, we don't have to either. But okay. There's nothing wrong with being careful. Go ahead. After Sol Jihu left, Kim Hana immediately called another organization. So you want us to protect Representative Sol's family without them finding out? Yes. I understand it's difficult, but is that something you can do? Difficult? You call that difficult? A chuckle rang out from the communication crystal. You're underestimating us too much. Not that this is something to boast about, but you must know of our internal conflict while we were in Harem, yes? I've heard of it. Though Kim Hana said this, she knew about it very well. The most critical reason that the triads were pushed out by Sicilia was their internal conflict. And during this period, their members were eager to kill each other, not just in paradise, but also on earth. It wasn't a particularly pleasant experience, but thanks to it, we've become quite accustomed to assassinating or protecting someone on earth. Then, of course, Valhalla's representative is a VVIP guest of the triads. We will be sure to protect them well. I'll bet my name on it. Thank you. I have files from when I investigated Representative Sol's background in the past. Just let me know if you need them. Just be mindful that they're more than a year old. If you need updated information, I will get that ready as soon as possible. That would help us a lot. Anyway, we'll send people over within 4 days, Earth time. They'll all be experts in the field, so you won't have to worry. Got it. The call ended. The Triads, which was Earth's most influential underground force, promised their protection, but Kim Hana was not satisfied. Just like Sol Jihu said, there was nothing wrong with being careful. Moreover, the Yun Seahui she knew was not someone who would back down so easily. Kim Hana immediately took out another communication crystal. It was the direct line to Cecilia's top brass. Chapter 404. A meeting between Valhalla and Sinyoung was finally confirmed. News that Sinyoung had sent the invitation instantly spread throughout the entire region. The public thought what was to come had finally arrived. Most intelligence agencies had predicted that Sinyoung would accept Valhalla's demands. The card that Valhalla had played, the migration of the Federation, was a checkmate to Sinyoung considering the dire straits. There was only decline waiting for them if they refused. They had no choice but to accept. However, this acceptance implied that Sinyoung was yielding to Valhalla. In other words, the regime that reigned for many years would change. Xingyang was finally stepping down from their throne.
In any case, the result of the meeting had not been revealed yet, so the whole city refrained from coming to hasty conclusions and placed their attention on the Scheherazade royal palace. However, the place that was at the center of so much public attention remained very quiet. Not to mention Scheherazade's queen, but Yun Seahui and dozens of other Xingyang members were all seated at the table, but no one spoke a word.
They weren't even looking each other in the eyes. In the silence, which was devoid of even the sound of breathing, everyone remained rigid with uncomfortable faces. After an unknown amount of time, the deathly silent palace suddenly became rowdy. One by one, the people sitting there with gloomy faces frowned as they turned towards the entrance. A moment later, one of the queen's attendants opened the palace doors to announce the news. They are here. But why had the attendant come in with such haste?
As the people whispered amongst themselves with puzzled expressions, the palace doors that were about to be closed slammed open again.
And bang! The sound of a foot powerfully slamming down on the floor rang throughout the palace.
Everyone grimaced in surprise at the sudden boom. A red-haired woman stood at the entrance with a confident smile. Her left hand rested on her waist where her longsword was hung while her right foot was stretched out to slam the floor.
It was the captain of Valhalla's vanguard team, the level 6 Duke, Phi Sora. She flashed a smile before proudly striding across the palace hall. What is the meaning of?
One of Xingyang's members burst out in anger before hastily covering his mouth. A tall black man who walked in behind her had glared at him with a scary expression. It was the level 5 barbarian champion, Richard Hugo. That wasn't all. Grand Steel Sniper, Marcel Guionia, High Templar, Chung Chohong, Archranger, Ace Kazuki, Imperial Knight, O Rahi. A force composed of only high rankers appeared one after the other, every one of them emitting a powerful aura. Each one of Valhalla's members was quite famous as they had completed hard expeditions for the past few years. However, rumors were known to always be embellished. That was what the people present thought too. However, seeing them personally instantly drove away that notion. Instead, their mind and body were suppressed into intimidation, causing them to be unable to meet their eyes. Valhalla's members really looked like they would immediately draw their weapons at any moment, so Xingyang's members were more than a little disconcerted. Never in their dreams had they imagined that Valhalla would come out like this. It was almost a declaration of war. Considering how Hanoi had met its downfall when Valhalla was holding their talk with the Japan Business Federation, Valhalla's actions could be seen as a show of force right before a declaration of war. Eventually, the personnel from Valhalla entered the palace before parting left and right. From behind them walked in a young man accompanied by the attendant. Level 7 Starseeker, Sol Jihu. The unique ranker and the one who had the final say in today's meeting finally arrived. Valhalla's representative has arrived. The attendant belatedly announced his entrance in a small voice. Kim Hannah walked in next to Sol Jihu, trying her hardest to control her expression. She felt an immeasurable sense of pleasure feeling the sour gazes of the people towards her right. She felt as if she was trashing a wedding of her ex who had dumped her, in hand with a perfect boyfriend with excellent abilities and looks. Just how long had she waited for this moment? While walking, she happened to meet the gaze of an executive member she knew. Long time no see, Manager Shin. Shin Hansing gave a bitter smile after receiving Kim Hannah's nod. Sol Jihu, who had gone ahead, looked up at the woman with faded blonde hair sitting on her throne. Her hair. She most likely originally had rich blonde hair like Charlotte Aria, but for some reason, her hair was now dark as if she had bleached it. At any rate, the woman that was staring at him with bunny eyes seemed to be the queen of the city, Rose Scheherazade. In truth, Sol Jihu had developed a prejudice against the Scheherazade royal family after they sent their guards when he was trying to capture Roberto Servillo and also when they sent an envoy to Eva afterward. At the very least, he didn't see the royal family in a favorable light. It was for this reason that he sent Phi Sora to display a show of force. After all, wherever Seinen had spread its influence was enemy territory.
Nevertheless, she was the queen of a kingdom.
Unless he wished to bathe the place in blood, he had to bear some courtesy. "Thank you for inviting us." As Sol Jihu flashed a smile and knelt on one knee, the rest of Valhalla's members slowly knelt while looking up at the queen.
"It's my pleasure to meet you, Queen Ro Scheherazade. I am Valhalla's representative, Sol Jihu." A low voice that was pleasant to the ears rang in the palace. Ro Scheherazade was at a loss for words. Only when Yun Seyahui lightly coughed did she regain her senses and unconsciously nod her head.
"Why, yes.
You did well to come here."
"Ah. To meet Valhalla's representative today, I am also,"
she mumbled while glancing towards the area where Seinen was seated. Her actions were unbefitting that of a queen, but such matters no longer surprised Sol Jihu. It wasn't as if there weren't other cities where their king or queen didn't act like a ruler. Please take a seat. I hope that today's talk will end on a good note for both parties."
Valhalla's members were seated on the opposite side of Seinen.
Sol Jihu sat down on the seat closest to Ro Scheherazade on the long table before looking at Yun Seyahui, who was seated across from him.
Yun Seyahui gazed back at Sol Jihu. A few members let loose their pent-up breaths, but the hall soon filled with new tension.
Kim Hannah slowly swept her eyes across the table with a relaxed face. It was normal for the host to speak up first.
However, all of Seinen's people remained silent.
Are they handing over the initiative?
This meeting was most likely going to end up as a negotiation between the two parties. Kim Hannah, who expected Seinen to impose some conditions in exchange for accepting their demands, felt that it wasn't too bad. That said, she chose to prod them instead of pouncing on the opportunity.
Of course, she first had to receive permission to do so. "Representative."
Sol Jihu quietly nodded when Kim Hannah asked in a small voice.
"First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting us to this meeting. We were worried when the invitation would arrive."
Kim Hannah lightly threw words full of hidden connotations while flashing a smile.
She continued while secretly praising herself for taking the extra care with her wedding makeup for this very day.
"But why don't I see a few people that should be here? The chairman retired from Paradise a while ago." A reply immediately came when she asked while looking at Yun Seyahui.
Kim Hannah pursed her lips. So the chairman had nothing to do with this incident.
Did I understand that correctly? While we have not officially announced it, the chairman has been semi-retired for a while. He passed over all of his authority to me 2 years ago and has since been enjoying his pastimes on Earth. Is that the case? This is the first time I am hearing of this. But setting that aside, shouldn't there be another person present? The HR director, Jung Minjong, is currently in disciplinary confinement.
I see.
Is he perhaps ill and at a hospital?
No, he is not.
Yun Seyahui composedly continued. The HR director, Jung Minjong, is still asserting his innocence. However, Seinen made a tentative conclusion concerning this case a few days ago. Seinen has decided that the HR director, Jung Minjong, is better off not attending this meeting, so we did not call him.
He himself rejected participating as well. Kim Hannah's eyebrows went up. Of course, we have no intention of covering up Jung Minjong's crimes.
Currently, Seinen employees are taking shifts to watch over him 24/7 and will immediately summon him back to Paradise once we reach a conclusion. We plan to use forceful means if he does not comply. In the case that he escapes, which I guarantee won't happen, I will take full responsibility. I ask for Valhalla's understanding regarding the actions that we've taken to make today's talk a little smoother. Yun Seyahui replied in a calm voice. She maintained her unwavering attitude from start to end. Kim Hannah smirked before opening her folder. The opposing party was displaying a far more submissive attitude than she expected. Judging that she had prodded them enough, Kim Hana decided to take the initiative.
And so, she openly began firing at the enemy.
Why did Sinyoung attack Valhalla?
She fired questions based on the 5 W's and H.
The issue was that all her questions weren't focusing on the who, what, when, where, and how but arrived at why, s.
François Delon was undeniably affiliated with Sinyoung and was known to be Sinyoung's ace after Sung Shi-hyun left.
If that's truly the case, then why was the explanation announced so late?
You mentioned that an internal investigation took place, but that was only when everything was already brought to light. Not to mention that you conspired with your partner organizations.
Just for what reasons did you? Kim Hana ruthlessly attacked the opposing party while Yoon Seohui calmly explained everything without a change in expression.
François Delon was the team leader of Attack Force 1 and was known to regularly talk with Jung Min-jong on a personal basis.
To Sinyoung, this incident was a bolt out of the blue since we were absolutely unaware of it. The accomplice, Bishop Roberto Servillo, was taken captive while the HR director, Jung Min-jong, adamantly stated that he had nothing to do with the incident, making it hard for us to find out the truth.
I'd like to remind you that the reason the organization said such things was because of a single person. We also are displeased with director Jung Min-jong and will absolutely not remain a mere spectator. What I'm trying to say is that we'd like you to look at the origin of this incident. When Bishop Roberto Servillo publicly confessed his crimes, the only person he mentioned was the Director of Human Resources, Jung Min-jong, whether it was for plotting or secretly contacting the organizations. Before they knew it, the meeting changed from a talk to something like a congressional hearing. You did that, right? No, that wasn't us. The expected questions and answers were traded back and forth.
Kim Hana restlessly hounded their faults, while Yoon Seohui admitted to the facts while reducing it to an act of an individual, not Sinyoung as a whole.
It was practically a meaningless conversation as everything went as predicted from both sides. What really mattered was the following conversation. I know we aren't in the position to ask this, but I'd like you to trust Sinyoung a little more.
Yoon Seohui, who barely withstood Kim Hana's offensive, looked at Sol Ji-hoo while placing her hand on her chest. The reason we invited Valhalla to this place today is not to offer excuses or to negotiate, but to openly admit our faults and clear our misunderstandings.
Misunderstandings, huh?
Sol Ji-hoo, who had silently been listening after leaving Kim Hana to carry the conversation, spoke for the first time.
From what I've heard so far,
everyone's attention was suddenly focused on him.
Sol Ji-hoo clasped his hands and slightly leaned forwards.
You're really good with your words. Yoon Seohui's throat lightly trembled.
You mentioned clearing misunderstandings, but is the scope of the misunderstandings limited to just this incident? Or does it include past events as well?
By past events, you're saying, there's no way you don't know, right?
Quote.
Actually, the Sinyoung I know is a pretty ambiguous organization. Sol Ji-hoo smirked.
I have both good and bad memories of it.
Well, I can't make myself forget the time I was chased out of Scheherazade and forced to move to Harem as soon as the neutral zone was closed.
That.
Yoon Seohui attempted to speak but Sol Ji-hoo raised his hand. He signaled that he had more to say.
Yes. I know.
If there are bad memories, then there are good ones as well.
I heard that the one who gathered the executors and sent reinforcements when Harem was in danger was none other than you, Sinyoung's representative director, Yoon Seohui. And you even personally attended Valhalla's opening ceremony and lent us a hand.
I'm still grateful for that day.
Really?
Sol Ji-hoo continued.
And if possible, I would like to cherish the gratitude I felt towards Sinyoung back then.
Yoon Seohui shut her eyes as if she guessed the words that would follow. Coming back to the main topic, after hearing what you've said.
Yes. I think that's possible. Sure. You might not have been aware.
But I have no intention to withdraw my statement that I publicly announced a few months ago.
Aren't human relationships like this as well? I apologized, or, I apologized and you didn't accept it.
If the perpetrator acts like this, the victim would become terribly mad.
A sincere apology that the victim could accept has to be made before the victim can decide whether to accept it or not.
After saying that, Sol Ji-hoo glanced sideways at Kim Hana.
Noticing his signal, she took out a document she had prepared in advance, out of her folder before looking at the attendant. A moment later, the attendant carefully passed the document to Yun Seahui.
Sol Ji-hoo said nothing more. The other party should now be clear of what he wanted and what she had to do from then on.
It was obvious that the contract given to Sin-young had more reinforced conditions, unlike the one given to the several organizations.
1. Those who sign the contract shall not collude with the parasites and not do anything against the interest of humanity.
2.
In the case that a war against the parasites breaks out, those who sign the contract shall spare no effort to help humanity.
These two terms remained unchanged.
After spending a few days struggling to think how much Sin-young would consent to, Kim Hana added a few more provisions. The first was for the HR director, Jung Min-jong, to be handed over to Valhalla. The second was for Sin-young to withdraw all of its branch offices except the one in Scheherazade.
And lastly, for Yun Seahui to step down from her position as the representative director. In addition to these, she added another provision which stated that on the day of fulfillment of the above three terms, Sin-young would be allowed to organize the Federation's migration that would take place 6 months later, if Sin-young wished for it. Sol Ji-hoo carefully observed Yun Seahui, who was staring at the contract.
The intent behind the added provisions was plain. The first needed no explanation, the second and fourth were to reduce Sin-young's authority and status, while the third was to make Yun Seora, who was close to Sol Ji-hoo, the new representative director. The third and fourth provisions are rather strong, but up until now, the responses of the organizations that met with Valhalla had been largely similar. They would suck up to him, only for their complexions to instantly change when shown the contact. So he was curious. What would Yun Seohui's response be? For now, she revealed no change in expression, but how would she act? She would try to negotiate at least one. It didn't matter. Valhalla had prepared several additional conditions in preparation for any number of cases. Kim Hana was rummaging about her documents, preparing for the upcoming negotiation. And after a few minutes of silence where only the sound of her flipping through the document was heard, Sin-young's representative director placed the contract back on the table. Fine. She took in a deep breath before nodding her head. I accept. Yun Seahui immediately lifted her pen to sign the contract, without the slightest hint of hesitation. Sol Ji-hoo's eyes narrowed. Chapter 405. Yun Seahui signed the contract and passed the pile of papers to the left. The middle-aged man, neatly dressed in a suit, bit his lower lip. But he couldn't possibly resist as his boss had already signed before him. Finally, the man took the pen out of his pocket and signed the contract papers. The same thing repeated. The next recipient signed the documents and handed them over to the person next to him. As the pile of contracts moved from left to right, Sol Ji-hoo and Kim Hana stared at Yun Seahui. They pretended to be calm, but the truth was that they were confused. They had spent days without any sleep preparing for this meeting, so it felt strange that Yun Seahui accepted their terms without a single objection. Could it be that? With a light frown, Kim Hana carefully went over Yun Seahui's words in her head. Sin-young made a tentative conclusion concerning this case a few days ago. This meant that Sin-young had already reached a decision, even before this meeting. This was proven by the fact that Sin-young's executives were signing the contracts without any resistance, although their faces did look grim. But why? But this logical conclusion confused her even more. The Yun Seohui is surrendering without putting up even a token resistance? Really? As new questions arose, the pile of contracts reached the far right, and when the last person finished signing, it was delivered back to Yun Seohui. Yun Seohui checked the documents one by one and handed the pile over to her assistant. Sol Ji-hoo looked down at the pile of contracts that Yun Seohui's assistant had carefully placed before him.
Flip.
He quickly flipped through the papers, his eyes scanning the signatures, before raising his head again to look at Yun Seohui. "There's something I want to tell you if you don't mind." Their eyes met and Yun Seohui gave a weak smile.
It might be a lot childish, but…
"Can I?"
Sol Ji-hoo tossed her a little nod. I don't hate Valhalla."
"She doesn't hate Valhalla?"
One of Sol Ji-hoo's eyebrows slowly lifted.
She was right.
It did sound childish. I've never felt envy or hatred towards Valhalla, nor have I ever considered you my rival.
Because the achievements Valhalla has made in recent years are not something that Seinen can match. Yun Seohui spoke in a low but articulate voice. "Of course, I understand this is sudden and that it may be hard for you to believe me. I have no excuse for that.
However," she let out a sigh and cleared her throat.
"If I really thought badly of you,
I would have done something about it a long time ago. Not only in paradise but also…" Sol Ji-hoo's eyes sharpened.
Yun Seohui didn't finish her sentence, but he heard the words she didn't say loud and clear.
"But also on earth. People who have earned grudges in paradise often face threats on earth.
It's a very common occurrence." The atmosphere grew stifling, but Yun Seohui continued without a flinch. "You wouldn't know what happened or how many attempts have been made since the last banquet was held a few years ago, and since you started making a name for yourself in paradise." Sol Ji-hoo didn't visit Earth often, but when he did, he never received any threat from anyone. Yun Seohui was saying that Seinen had been protecting him all along.
I'm not saying this to impress you or to convince you to go easy on me. I'm merely stating the fact that I had many chances to betray you, but I chose not to." A faint smile spread across Yun Seohui's face. "Because the thought has never once crossed my mind. I admired you, representative of Valhalla, for all the incredible achievements you made for the sake of paradise. I wanted to become your friend and help you in any way I could." She slowly lowered her gaze and continued. "Of course, my opinion is mine alone. There were a few people in Seinen who disagreed with me. I saw these people every day, but failed to notice what was going on inside their heads." Yun Seohui closed her eyes. "In regards to that, I have no excuse to offer. So I made my decision before this meeting to let you know my feelings and set the record straight. Even if it means I have to accept every term that Valhalla offers." With that, Yun Seohui slowly rose from her chair. And she spoke. "I'm sorry." She straightened her shoulders. "I apologize for the distress and the hurt caused by the recent series of incidents." Clasped her hands in front of her waist. "From now on, Seinen will do its best to prevent the recurrence of such incidents." And starting at her head. "And I promise in the name of God Nvidia to faithfully fulfill the conditions set by Valhalla until your misunderstanding is resolved." She bowed 90 degrees, in a polite and humble manner. Their meeting ended much earlier than they had expected. Sol Ji-hoo tried his best to stay alert until the end, but Yun Seohui's subsequent remarks made him feel like he was overreacting. Yun Seohui promised to get signatures from each of Seinen's employees, and with several executives, she took the time to apologize to each member of Valhalla. In the end, she shook hands with Sol Ji-hoo, and, with a shy smile, asked if they could finally be friends. Before leaving, Sol Ji-hoo observed Yun Seohui with his innate ability. She was still shining in 5 colors, like the last time he saw her. But more importantly, 5. Level of cognition. Enterprising. Takes the initiative in achieving one's goal. Given up. chaotic. Many things are jumbled up and is impossible to unravel. The second slot of her level of cognition, which represented the emotion she was currently experiencing, stated, given up. What exactly had Yun Seahui given up during this meeting?
Sol Jihu couldn't find the answer to that question even after the meeting was over. On their way back, the members of Valhalla were all in high spirits.
The Sin-young had given in to their demands.
How could they not be glad that it was over? Hey, did you see that?
Did you?
Sin-young's executive director just bowed to us.
Bastards.
That'll teach them not to mess with us.
Cho-hong and Hugo cackled merrily. I don't know.
Something did feel a little off.
When I was in White Rose, I never imagined something like this could happen.
Phi Sora seemed skeptical and a little worried.
Hugo tilted his head in question.
What's wrong?
She apologized. And she's super pretty. Look, if a pretty face could automatically earn forgiveness, I'd be making a living as a notorious criminal by now.
But she signed the agreement. Which means she can't mess with us now, right? Because of the consequences.
Well, yes.
Even Phi Sora couldn't find any fault with that.
I mean, she did swear on her god as a priest.
And our representative basically backed her into a corner. Makes me think she's smart, though I'm still not sure if her apology was sincere.
She shrugged, concluding that it wouldn't be a bad idea to keep an eye on Yun Seahui for a while. Rahi stood staring at the Scheherazade palace with cold eyes. One of her eyebrows raised slightly to reveal her annoyance. She stared and stared until their carriages arrived, then felt Sol Jihu's gaze and turned towards him. What? What are you thinking about? Nothing. Rahi ran a hand through her hair with a sigh. I just remembered someone from my past.
Your past?
A high school friend. We were part of the same group of friends that did everything together.
The topic was unexpected and her tone wasn't a happy one.
Yun Seahui reminds me of that bitch.
The way they talk and the way they act, it's basically the same. She frowned angrily at the thought of her friend. How are they alike? How should I describe it? They both have a mask.
It's like they're fake, or artificial.
Kim Hana, who was standing next to Sol Jihu, threw a quick glance at Rahi. I can't pinpoint exactly what's wrong. Something about them annoys me, but I can't say what for sure. Rahi shook her head, saying that some of her friends still think of that particular friend as a bright and outgoing person. Anyway, I don't want to be anywhere near her.
It's the first time I've felt this way about someone since Baek Haiju. Rahi, who spat in the direction of the palace, turned towards the carriage. Are you still friends with her?
Sol Jihu blurted out.
Rahi stopped. Nope.
She turned towards him with a little smirk.
I cut ties with her a long time ago. It was the best decision of my life, without a doubt. With a smile on her lips, Rahi climbed onto the carriage. Sol Jihu followed after her, feeling somewhat restless. He couldn't relax even after settling down in the carriage. The result wasn't bad at all. Sin-young readily accepted Valhalla's terms, and the signed contract was in his hands. She could no longer conspire against Valhalla, at least in paradise. Still, he just couldn't put his mind at rest. After pondering for a while, Sol Jihu concluded that the reason he was anxious was because of his preconceptions about Yun Seahui. Come to think of it, Kim Hana wasn't the only one who warned him about her. Be careful of Yun Seahui.
Black Sol Jihu had said the same thing. There must have been a good reason for such a strong-minded and cautious man to say such a thing. He also recalled the time he looked at Yun Seahui with future-gauging 9 eyes during the opening ceremony. What's your reason? Why does our mighty spear demon? Why does he hate me so much?
I know you have a grudge against Sin-young. But don't you know how hard I tried to ease your heart?
How could you do this to me?
Kill me. Just kill me instead. The words Yun Seahui screamed at Black Sol Jihu.
You didn't do anything for me. It was for Sinyoung. You used my strength to protect your company, and I used you to achieve my goals.
That's why you threw away everything and desperately clung to me.
Sung Shi-hyun told me you were a crazy bitch right before he died at my hands. He was right.
The words Black Soul Ji-hoo said to Yun Seahui.
You got discarded, didn't you?
I guess you couldn't enter his fence, Tilda.
What did I tell you?
He's an uncontrollable lunatic.
You want to, what, break it if you can't have it? Is that it?
And the words Kim Hana spat at Yun Seahui. He remembered them one by one.
In Sol Ji-hoo's opinion, Yun Seahui was definitely not normal. She was unpredictable and totally uncontrollable, as evidenced by the fact that she once switched sides to join the parasites.
But that was in the past.
Knowing her present self, Sol Ji-hoo was reluctant to draw conclusions.
Because yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet.
Yun Seahui was a woman of 5 colors.
He had seen her become an enemy. But he had also seen the exact opposite of that.
The future in which Yun Seahui, standing beside him as the executor of Nvidia, the star of envy, waving her hand at the crowd as they cheered her name.
Maybe it was already too late. Sol Ji-hoo had forced Yun Seahui to sign the contract and Yun Seahui accepted it. The contract basically specified that he chose Yun Seora over Yun Seahui. I don't know.
What's wrong with you? Are you okay? As Sol Ji-hoo rubbed his forehead, Phi Sora leaned closer and asked.
Sol Ji-hoo shook his head without a word. Now this is a rare sight. You must really be tired.
Do you have a headache? I think the carriage will leave soon.
Maybe you should get some sleep, or do you want to lean on me?
Phi Sora tapped her shoulder lightly and Seo Yuhui, who was sitting across from them, got up in a hurry. It was then.
We're leaving.
Just as the wagoner lifted the whip, a hurried knock was heard and the carriage door swung open. Not only Sol Ji-hoo but also Phi Sora, and Seo Yuhui, who was forcibly pulling up Phi Sora from her seat, widened their eyes. There, a stranger stood, dressed in an oversized cloak with a hood, fidgeting nervously. The stranger looked at Sol Ji-hoo and spoke in a hurry.
Excuse me, but could you?
A thin but low voice escaped the stranger's lips. A moment later, the carriage set off.
Asterisk. The carriage pulled by 4 horses passed through the eastern gate.
Half an hour later, the wagoner suddenly changed the direction of the carriage.
The carriage spun around to the left and headed back towards the city where it had just left.
This time it moved towards the western gate, instead of the southern gate. Soon the carriage stopped at a secluded spot near the gate, and 2 people in hooded cloaks got off the carriage and began walking towards the city.
Hold on.
As Scheherazade neared, Sol Ji-hoo stopped the hooded figure in front of him. Pardon?
Sorry. I just think this will be better. What do you wait? Sol Ji-hoo literally swept the stranger off her feet, and the stranger wriggled in response. Hold tight. He wrapped his arms around her and raised his mana. Tong. With the sound of air exploding, Sol Ji-hoo's body scattered like the wind. Tong, 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 tong. The wind climbed the castle wall and blew into the city, towards the back gate of the Scheherazade Palace. Chapter 406. The one who knocked on the carriage door was none other than Rose Scheherazade's attendant. The attendant relayed that the queen strongly wanted to meet Valhalla's representative privately and asked if he could come to see her without anyone finding out. Deciding to accept this request, Sol Ji-hoo turned back while pretending to go back to Eva, even going as far as using ethereal shift to sneak into the city. According to the attendant, the queen was waiting inside the royal palace's private back garden.
After jumping over the rear wall, Sol Ji-hoo knelt down and collected his breath. Damn, using it consecutively isn't easy. Even with his mana being at high, using a high-rank skill consecutively was taking a huge toll on his mana. Hoping that this meeting would be worth the trouble, Sol Jihu put down the attendant.
"Which way is to the back garden?"
he asked while dusting off his clothes, but the attendant with disheveled hair didn't say anything and only covered her mouth with her hands. Then, when their eyes met, she shot up as though she was frightened out of her wits and then ran for her life. Sol Jihu's speed seemed to have scarred her for life. Was it that scary? Sol Jihu tilted his head and started walking. Perhaps because the queen had taken appropriate measures, or because this was a private back garden, there wasn't anyone in sight. After a bit of walking, Sol Jihu arrived at a petite garden decorated with trees and flowers.
Finding the queen wasn't difficult.
A slender woman dressed in a white robe with long, faded blonde hair was watering the flowers in front of a flowerbed.
It was Rose Scheherazade. Ah! She turned around, perhaps having heard his footsteps. She put down the watering can and smiled brightly.
"You came."
Sol Jihu stopped about 2 meters in front of her.
"Sorry for troubling you. I could have told you after the meeting, but it was a difficult situation."
Rose Scheherazade looked apologetic.
It was indeed as she said.
Things would have been easier if she had just asked to see him after the meeting.
But Sol Jihu could guess why she chose to do things this way, judging by the way she asked him to come without anyone finding out. "It's fine," he replied.
"I heard you wanted to meet me." "Yes."
"Your fame knows no bounds."
"In truth,
I've been wanting to see you for a long time."
"I've heard all sorts of unbelievable stories from my surroundings.
So much so that my ears hurt."
"Surroundings?" Sol Jihu asked just in case. "Did Queen Charlotte Arya or Princess Teresa tell you about me?"
No.
"I'm not really acquainted with them.
Though it's a bit embarrassing to say, it has been a while since we lost contact with surrounding kingdoms."
Rose Scheherazade smiled faintly while blushing in embarrassment.
Sol Jihu saw her in a renewed light. The gentleness in her voice, the prim smile on her face. Her actions and speech both carried a subtle gracefulness that was befitting of a queen. He found it hard to believe that this was the same person as the frightened, stammering person he saw at the meeting.
"I asked to meet Representative Sol privately, because I owe you an apology."
"An apology?"
"Yes."
When the video was being played in Scheherazade and Valhalla was searching luxurious temple, the Scheherazade royal family not only sent guards to hinder Valhalla, but it also sent an envoy to Eva.
Rose Scheherazade smiled bitterly.
"When I think about how you must have felt, I can only say that I am sorry."
"Though you may think I am being shameless, please allow me to explain." Rose Scheherazade cleared her throat before continuing. "I won't deny that I authorized it to happen. But I would like you to know that I didn't have a choice." "Didn't have a choice?"
It sounded like Sinyoung forced her to do so against her will.
"Maybe that's what she's trying to tell me."
He suspected as much ever since she said that she lost contact with the surrounding kingdoms. "You don't have to apologize."
"I'm happy that our meeting today ended well. To be honest, I had forgotten about it until you reminded me."
Sol Jihu spoke casually. "You're generous."
Rose Scheherazade smiled sweetly before turning around. "I'm infinitely grateful.
If it's all right, would you walk with me for a bit?"
She opened her hand and gestured toward the garden.
Sol Jihu nodded. "This is a beautiful garden."
"Thank you. I raised each flower with the utmost care and attention. I spend most of my time in this place, you see." "Is gardening your hobby?"
No. It's not like I hate it, but it's just that this is the only place where my heart can be at peace." Sol Jihu wanted to walk behind her, but Rose Scheherazade purposely slowed down so that they were side by side. They walked exchanging meaningless small talk when Rose Scheherazade suddenly asked, "How much do you know about this city, Representative Sol?"
It was a sudden, unexpected question.
"Do you know why Scheherazade became the capital of the Seven Kingdoms?" Rose Scheherazade asked another question as Sol Jihu racked his brains to figure out the intent of her question.
"Because it's at the center of the other 6 cities."
You're not wrong.
Rose Scheherazade smiled softly.
But to be more precise, it's not that Scheherazade is at the center of the other 6 cities. But the other 6 cities form a final line of defense around Scheherazade. Final line of defense?
Yes.
To the 6 cities, Scheherazade serves as the final bastion.
In other words, there was something more to Scheherazade other than its favorable location that made it special. Representative Sol, have you heard of Gorad Boga? Sol Jihu furrowed his brows at the sudden mention of the word.
He certainly knew the word. But when the bishop was going on about the supposed divine land, he only pretended to believe him and scoffed on the inside. After all, the place he was describing was equivalent to the legendary, mythical places of Earth that were only talked about in literature.
I heard one of Gorad Boga's special traits is an incredible amount of vital energy diffused in its surroundings. Sol Jihu was indirectly saying how Scheherazade didn't have vital energy in its atmosphere. Not at all.
Distinguishing Gorad Boga with the existence of vital energy is strictly a personal judgment, and it is a wrong interpretation.
Rose Scheherazade slowly shook her head.
Gorad Boga, the city of God, is the place that was ruled by the world's first god after their birth. Any land with a trace of this god's rule can become Gorad Boga.
She spoke kindly like a teacher instructing her student. My ancestor discovered this trace and built a new city around the ruin.
That city is Scheherazade. Sol Jihu only half believed her. He wasn't the type to believe in a legend without proof, but he also didn't believe that a queen would lie at a time like this.
He just couldn't see why she would trick him at this point.
You mean the ruin is inside this city?
Yes, precisely. Rose Scheherazade nodded her head.
A grand magic, the purpose of which is to protect the city of God, is hidden in Scheherazade.
When Sol Jihu stared at her blankly, the calmly explaining Rose Scheherazade blinked rapidly and waved her hand.
Ah, but that doesn't mean it's anything amazing.
Although it has the power of a god, our enemy is also a god. At best, it will let the city hold out for a little while longer. Gorad Boga.
Sol Jihu searched through his memories. Why did you not do as you were told?
I had no choice.
That's surprising.
I didn't think I asked for anything difficult. It's not that I didn't, but I couldn't. I couldn't create the situation you wanted, nor did I have the power to do so. He remembered the talk Black Sol Jihu had with Yun Seyahui during the defense of Scheherazade. They were talking about a plan of some sort. Could that have been related to Scheherazade being Gorad Boga? Are you curious what magic it is? Rose Scheherazade asked while furtively observing Sol Jihu's expression. Yes.
Can you tell me?
I don't see why not.
But Scheherazade being Gorad Boga is actually a secret that only a few people know.
Rose Scheherazade giggled.
How about this?
I'll tell you and even show you the ruin if you want. In exchange, Representative Sol has to answer just one question honestly.
It was nothing difficult.
Sure. What do you want to know?
Judging that it wasn't a bad trade, Sol Jihu agreed. Meanwhile, he racked his brain trying to figure out why Rose Scheherazade called him here and just what it was that she wanted to ask.
Is she trying to show this city's value?
To hasten the Federation's entry into Scheherazade?
No, that doesn't explain why she wanted me to come secretly. As all sorts of thoughts swirled inside this head. What will happen to Seinen from now on? A question that overturned all expectations flew out. Sol Jihu widened his eyes in surprise. I heard that Valhalla destroyed a good number of organizations that were related to the attack incident. A low, monotonous voice rang out.
Of course, Seinen agreed to all the provisions you laid out, but you can also see them as the main culprit behind the last incident.
Rose Scheherazade stopped walking.
Sol Jihu stopped along with her.
Are you not going to destroy Seinen?
Sol Jihu doubted his ears.
The way she's talking. It almost sounded like she was desperately waiting for Seinen to be destroyed.
That wasn't all. The gentle warmth that she was giving off had disappeared in an instant, replaced by a bone-chilling coldness. What?
Such resentment.
How can a living person have so much resentment? Even Floan, who was inside the pendant, was flustered.
Oh yeah.
Thinking about it now, the energy Rose Scheherazade was giving off was similar to the energy that was emitted by Floan, who became a vengeful spirit from hundreds of years of resentment. But why? Sol Jihu felt he shouldn't answer this question thoughtlessly. That said, the case was closed.
Feeling rather uncomfortable, Sol Jihu glanced to the side. Rose Scheherazade was looking straight ahead, quietly. He wasn't mistaken. Rose Scheherazade, whom he felt would break like a twig, suddenly changed. He could sense a bitter hatred from her pure, graceful face. This contradicting duality reminded him of Yun Seahui. Could it be that she was Yun Seahui? Was she disguised as Rose Scheherazade to try to figure out his intentions? This was a plausible suspicion, as Sol Jihu had been thinking that the meeting concluded too easily. And so, Sol Jihu activated the future gauging 9 eyes. But when he glanced at Rose Scheherazade, he was surprised yet again. Her color. He couldn't see it. Not just her color, but he also couldn't see her status window. It meant his innate ability wasn't working. This wasn't the first time that the 9 eyes didn't work. But it was hard to believe that Rose Scheherazade was an executor or a holder of the divine vestige. What's going on? Sol Jihu turned serious. It was then. The sound of hurried footsteps from the distance broke the heavy silence. The man and woman turned around simultaneously. The attendant who arranged their meeting was running toward them. "Why, Your Majesty!" After running up to them, the attendant went on her tiptoes and whispered into Rose Scheherazade's ears. The queen's eyes widened before a look of fluster flashed in them. What? He asked what you were doing, and ordered you to come immediately. But, how? Wasn't he? I'm not sure. He suddenly called us. Rose Scheherazade bit her lower lip and waved her hand. The attendant went away with a worried look. Rose Scheherazade bit her nails with a stunned expression before doing a double take and asking. Did anyone see you on the way here? No. Are you sure? No one found out? I can't be 100% certain, but I can say I'm 99% certain. I even used ethereal shift consecutively to go over the rear wall. Then, Rose Scheherazade sighed deeply and dropped her head. It must have been that child. Even though we've been close friends since we were kids. It sounded like the attendant told Sinyang about the Queen's secret meeting. Representative Sol, can we talk about this matter some other time? That's fine with me, but if you're worried, I can go with you. No, thank you for your kind words, but it's fine. I would actually appreciate your protection, but I'm afraid it will only make matters more complicated in the future. It would be a different story if you're willing to stay by my side though. Sol Jihu stared at Rose Scheherazade, who was smiling bitterly. From trembling with fear and looking weak, to giving off a gentle and wise aura, to looking like a vengeful villain, to then looking like a pitiful bird trapped in a cage. Sol Jihu could no longer tell which one was the true Rose Scheherazade. I'm sorry for making you go through so much trouble. Wait just a bit longer. Before leaving, Sol Jihu said to Rose Scheherazade, who was bowing her head and apologizing. Scheherazade will change soon as well. Will it? It was a vague response that was neither positive nor negative. You must have seen it in the provision regarding the Federation's migration. Once you receive the authority to modify status windows, you'll have more power over. Sol Jihu stopped short of finishing his sentence. To say that when you're also an Earthling. It really is refreshing. It was because the corner of Rose Scheherazade's mouth curled up. It didn't look like a positive response. I know that you have good intentions. It's just. Rose Scheherazade slowly pushed her hair back and smiled faintly. It's not just the Earthlings.
Don't think it's just the Earthlings.
He had heard the same words before. Asterisk.
Though it seemed like his presence was known, Sol Jihu still used ethereal shift when leaving. The talk had dragged on longer than he expected, and he knew Valhalla's members were waiting for him.
He was bombarded by questions as soon as he entered the carriage.
Did anyone catch you? Why did the Queen call you?
And such. It feels like I came back from a pandemonium.
After summarizing the experience with a single word, Sol Jihu waved his hand, saying he had something to think about. Soon, the carriage set off.
This is driving me insane.
Sol Jihu had agreed to meet with Rose Scheherazade, hoping he would discover some clues that would guide him out of this foggy situation. But never mind clues, the meeting only made things more complicated. It was so much so that he wanted to use his contribution points, re-summon Black Sol Jihu and the Path of the Soul, and ask him questions. Though, he probably couldn't answer anything even if he did succeed in re-summoning him. After remaining silent for a long time, Sol Jihu glanced to the side. Kim Hana was staring into the air with an expressionless face. Can I ask you a question?
As Sol Jihu quietly asked,
Kim Hana's pupils moved stealthily.
What kind of queen is Rose Scheherazade?
As a person?
Or as a queen?
Both.
As a person, she's a pitiful widow. As a queen,
I wouldn't say she's a failure, but there's nothing she can do.
Sol Jihu opened his eyes wide.
Widow?
Yes. Her husband died from an unknown cause 8 years ago.
Ah, I heard about that too.
There are rumors that Sinyoung killed him.
Is that true?
Cho Hong suddenly cut in and asked. Kim Hana continued with an indifferent expression. She's also called slut, puppet, marionette, and other such names.
These are all names I heard when I was dragged to company dinners with high-ranking executives. That sounds pretty vulgar. It is vulgar. Kim Hana said quietly.
I don't know the details because my job wasn't related to the royal family and Sinyoung has been covering it up.
But if the rumors going around the company were true, and if I were Rose Scheherazade, then I would have bitten my tongue and committed suicide long ago. It's that bad? It goes beyond anything you can think of. As Miss Cho Hong said, there are rumors that Sinyoung assassinated King Gyros Scheherazade, and there are also rumors that Sinyoung's high-ranking executives forced Rose Scheherazade into becoming their mistress.
Kim Hana turned her head as if she didn't want to talk about it any further. Sol Jihu laughed wryly and asked again.
Then what did you think about this meeting? Kim Hana closed her mouth and smacked her lips. I regret it a little. You regret it?
Yes. I'm wondering what would have happened if we had left a hole for them to dig through without driving them to a corner. Our plan was detailed and well executed. We received help from various places in a timely manner, and we even had a powerful card known as the Federation. Of course, Miss Seo Yuhui's scheme and Sinyoung's mistake played the biggest role in bringing about today's event. Indeed, as Raging Temperance's example showed, an internal enemy was scarier than an external one. But I can't help but think that leaving Sinyoung with no other option helped Yun Seohui justify her decision. If we had purposely left a weakness that the other side could dig into, I think it might have helped us figure out Yun Seohui's sincerity. Kim Hana spoke almost in a mumbling voice and then pressed her forehead. I don't know. I might be overthinking it. The results are what we wanted, after all. Kim Hana seemed to be wary of Yun Seohui as well. Sol Jihu couldn't help but think that things would have been easier if he had wiped the floor with Sinyoung like with other organizations. I can be sure of one thing. There is something in Sinyoung, no, Scheherazade. Right. Setting aside the overarching problem of Earthling's attitude, there had to be a serious problem for Gyula to have given him such a trial. Sol Jihu mulled over Kim Hana's words before coming to a conclusion. Though there was a slightly fishy aftertaste, his goal had been achieved to a certain degree. All that was left was to confirm it.
Whether humanity had changed, or whether there was a persisting problem. Sol Jihu calmly said, "It seems I'll need to visit the temple as soon as I get back to Eva."
Chapter 407.
Sinyoung was quiet after Valhalla left. The executive members had returned to the building and the majority didn't have very pleasant expressions. The woman at the reception sensed something was off and did not lift her head until all the executive members had gone upstairs. Not a single person dared to carelessly open their mouth. The always bustling lobby ceased its activities and became deserted. The dead silence that flowed within the building made it look like a department store right before its closing hour. There was only a single person smiling in that sullen atmosphere.
"Here. Please get this done within this week. Talk.
Yun Seahui handed over a pile of documents that she tidied up by tapping their edges twice against the table. They were the contracts that Valhalla had presented in return for keeping Sinyoung alive.
Executive Jang, please take responsibility to receive the signatures of all Sinyoung employees. It will take approximately 6 days from Scheherazade to Eva, so it'll be best to complete it by then. We'll then be able to send a notice that we have fulfilled our promise the very day that Valhalla arrives in Eva." She shook the papers in her hand, signaling him to quickly take it, but the man didn't respond. The middle-aged man called Executive Jang looked at her with a sad look. "We need to issue an order for all branch offices in other cities to retreat." Yun Seahui shrugged before placing the contracts back down and continued. "Also, we need to look for my successor. We'll call an assembly next week to decide, to convey the news." "By a successor, you mean?" Executive Jang, who had been silently listening, spoke up with difficulty. "You're not asking because you don't know, right?" Yun Seahui smirked. "Is there anyone else but her? It's a family company after all." Executive Jang hung his head after hearing her speak nonchalantly. "Director." "Yes?" "I feel like we survived." Yun Seahui calmly spoke. "It would have been another story if we had any other options. But what we had to choose from was only between life and death. Shouldn't we choose to live no matter the cost?" She was right. Valhalla had stormed in, bringing all of its members with the intent to wage war. Blood would have flowed if they had been the tiniest step out of line. Their opponent had the power and justification to turn such a hypothetical situation into reality. "It's all good since we survived. We've even managed to maintain our position as the representative organization." It's better to go all the way if we're going to bend over anyways. As far as our waists will allow. Sorrow deepened on Executive Jang's face as Yun Seahui continued her words. As someone who had watched over her since childhood, he knew better than anyone else how hard Yun Seahui had worked to reach the pinnacle of Sinyoung. Her efforts were enough to make Yun Seojin, a man who didn't even trust his relatives, retire without worry after leaving Sinyoung in her hands. It was finally time for her to shine, but the results she had achieved after toiling and struggling for over 20 years were swept clean after a single mistake. She didn't let it show on her face, but he couldn't even fathom what she must be feeling at that moment. It won't be bad going under manager Yun. Rather, it'll be for the best. Valhalla's representative will shower her with lots of care. Yun Seahui smiled before getting up from her seat. She picked up her ivory suit jacket and wore it. "Then I'll leave it to you. I'll be going home early today." She slung her black handbag over her shoulder before nimbly walking out of her office with steps as light as feathers. Executive Jang gripped the stack of contracts in both his hands before slowly bowing. The place Yun Seahui headed towards after coming out of the Sinyoung building was the warp gate within the temple. She had returned to Earth via the portal. The return coordinates were set for the company. She saw the familiar scenery of her company after coming out of the president's office. When she stopped in place to emptily stare about her, her gaze met the eyes of several people. Hello. An employee panicked and lowered his head.
Then Yun Siohui's eyes, which had dimmed for a second, suddenly livened up before she flashed a bright smile.
Yes, hello to you too.
What brings you here, director?
Ah, manager is away at the moment. No. I'm not here to see manager Seo.
I'm just on my way home.
Ah. Mr. Kim Sung-soo, was it? Aren't you getting off work? Ah. No. I still have to receive feedback for something. Looks like our manager Seo made another excuse to slack off again outside.
Yun Seohui grinned after raising her left arm to check her watch. He'll call around 7:05 p.m. after exiting the sauna and say that his meeting with the customer lasted too long so that he'll go home instead. The employee, Kim Sung-soo, gave an awkward smile when Yun Seohui knowingly predicted what was to come.
You only have to wait 42 minutes and 17 seconds more, then. Good luck.
After winking at him, Yun Seohui resumed her steps. Everyone she met as she walked down the hall greeted her, and Yun Seohui returned their greetings with a smile. Because she stopped to chat with half of those individuals, she took 20 minutes to arrive at the lobby. After finally leaving through the front door, Yun Seohui walked down the street at sunset to arrive at a towering office dell.
Agu,
it's been a long time since you've last come.
Even the guard at the entrance amicably greeted her as soon as he saw Yun Seohui.
It's been a while at Juicy Tilda. How have you been lately?
Nothing much.
Every day is the same.
Fufu, I'll be coming more often from now on. I bet you won't be so bored if you see my face every day.
After lightly joking with him, Yun Seohui waved her hand as she got on the elevator.
Her face remained smiling until she got off at the top floor and stood in front of the door to her room. She tapped the password on her door lock before opening the door. The large room that was over 330 square meters big was very dark inside.
Because there were blackout curtains everywhere, not a single ray of light could be seen in the room.
And when she switched on the lights, a shockingly empty house was revealed. The commonplace decorations were nowhere to be seen, and only the bare minimum furniture needed for a living was visible. It was absolutely bare.
Just like Yun Seohui's face that had suddenly changed as soon as she entered through the door. Her face only had 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and other essential features, but was void of any expression.
It was the extreme of nothingness. With an almost aloof face, Yun Seohui was about to hang her handbag on the hanger out of habit before pausing. Frowning, she let the bag in her hands drop to the floor. She carelessly took off her jacket and tossed it on the ground as well.
She unbuttoned a few buttons of her shirt before flopping down on the rocking chair near the window. With practiced motions, she placed a cigarette in her mouth before lighting it.
I'm so bored. Smoke spilled out of her red lips as she sighed. How much time had passed? As the street died in sunset hues darkened and the night deepened, the number of cigarette butts in the ashtray on top of the table increased one by one. Yun Seohui showed no movement until then. There was too much going on in her mind, thoughts about the meeting, or more specifically, of Seol Ji-hoo. Strictly speaking, the results weren't bad. Negotiations only worked if both parties were equal or if the weaker side had something the stronger side wanted. It didn't apply to situations like today where the two parties were on the opposite ends of the stick. Not to mention that Kim Hana was at Valhalla. Since she was grinding her teeth at the mention of Sin-young, she must have been thoroughly prepared to take the utmost advantage of their superior position. Kim Hana, who was skilled at scamming people in deals, would have been persistent in winning over 2 provisions if they gave up on one. Thus, immediately accepting the initial conditions offered was, in anyone's eyes, the best possible move she could have made, and in reality, she obtained the best results. Yes. Yun Seohui had taken responsibility and done an excellent job. But even so, why was she feeling so vain despite all this? Was it because she had to lower her head in humiliation? No, she had experienced countless similar situations in the past and was confident that she could endure more. Was it because Sin Young's influence had diminished? She had been prepared for that.
Was it because she was forced out of the position that she had sacrificed her childhood, her teens, and 20s for, which were the prime years of her life? This might be a part of the reason. Yun Seahui pondered for a while before being able to find a clue in a memory that suddenly flashed in her mind.
A few years ago,
Yun Seahui found a delicious-looking company in the same pharmaceutical field and had forcibly tried to push for the acquisition and merger of the company without their consent. However, the opposing company didn't bat an eye and returned a terrible counterattack, and as a result, Sin Young was at risk of losing control of its own company.
In retrospect, there had been no way out, just like this incident. When Yun Seahui visited the opposing company, the young female CEO of Haesol Research Institute looked at her, begging for forgiveness before saying this. "You're quite an interesting person, aren't you? I'm not being sarcastic. Really. I feel like you're similar to me. You probably feel everything will go your way, that you can grasp everything in your hands if you put your mind to it, and now living itself is boring.
Am I correct?
I'm like that, too. Rather, I was like that. Before I met a certain person, that is. Our meeting seems like fate, so should I give you a piece of advice? The world doesn't revolve around you. The world decides its own center, not you. It'll be good for you to realize this fast. You're going to die if you keep living like that."
Me?
I quickly stuck myself to that center as soon as I realized this. I didn't want to die. Right. Everything was because of Seoul Jihu. If you can't forcibly snatch it, you can make it come to you instead. The cause and effects of every major action are surprisingly clear. And since the cause and effect is clear, retribution is even more so. Unless your brain is wired with the principle of causality. Thinking back about how ridiculous her first thoughts of Seoul Jihu were when she first noticed him.
She only realized it after 3 years had gone by. Actually, she had felt it earlier, but it was already too late by then.
She still didn't think her thoughts were wrong. Only, her opponent completely exceeded her expectations, making her thoughts seem laughable.
Seoul Jihu had flown past her with frightening speed, just as she was about to grab the ends of his clothes.
He was so fast that she couldn't run after him, even if she tried. I think I understand that Uni's feelings now.
After talking to herself for a short moment, Yun Seahui buried herself in the chair and stretched her neck back. She listlessly looked up at the ceiling with lonely eyes. I'm still grateful for that day.
Really? Only that much? If possible, I would like to cherish the gratitude I felt towards Sin Young back then. She had sincerely helped him in paradise and on earth, but that was the extent of his gratitude. Still, wasn't it too harsh to tell me to step down? Yun Seahui simpered and murmured to herself. Do you know how hard I worked to get here, and now you want me to leave everything behind and scram?
Do you want me to die? She talked as if Seoul Jihu was right there in front of her. You don't know anything.
These were words she couldn't say during the meeting.
Yun Seahui stared at the ceiling with a vicious glint in her eyes. Then suddenly, a sneer escaped her mouth.
She had thought of Seoul Jihu's expression when she had signed the contract without any hesitation.
The reason she accepted everything without a word? Was it for Sin Young? Since she could end everything if she sacrificed herself?
No, that wasn't it.
That was what people wildly guessed, but Yun Seahui's true intentions were completely different.
It was because she wanted to see. I bet you'll be shocked if I do this. She had acted on a spontaneous fit of anger. Ha! She suddenly burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha! She couldn't understand why she was laughing either. Then she suddenly stopped.
What's the reason? She glared at the ceiling and angrily spat with a scary face. Why is our Valhalla's representative so hell-bent on pushing me down?
Words similar to that time.
How can you do this to me?
Once she started talking, words spilled out like a dam breaking loose. It wasn't me. I wasn't the one who tried to kill you. I didn't know. I really didn't know anything.
It's not like I know everything.
What was I supposed to do if I didn't know?
Once she started, words poured out of her like water gushing out of a broken dam.
I get it that you're angry.
But do you know how hard I tried? Do you know how many times I protected you and your family back on Earth?
You could have given me a chance based on what I've done for you so far, couldn't you?
If you're acting based on causality, then you can't do this to me. Then why are you suddenly being like this?
Why me?
Ha! Her voice rang out in the empty silence. Before she knew it, Yun Seahui was crying with tears in her eyes.
Then she suddenly snickered and broke into laughter.
Inside the empty office-cell, the sounds of crying and laughing alternated.
Who?
Barely managing to stop, Yun Seahui quickly took deep breaths and wiped her tears.
Anyways, so this is how you're going to come out, huh?
She suddenly took out a phone from her pocket and repeatedly turned it on and off.
I'll live if I side with him and die if I don't, huh? She muttered to herself before the end of her lips curled up. Fine, then kill me. Her fingers that had busily moved stopped. The phone's screen was lit. Rather than living long and thin, screw it all. It's better to die. Short and thick, white cigarette smoke spilled out of her mouth.
I did nothing wrong. Yun Seahui hummed while she tapped on her phone. Everything is your fault.
Turururu.
The call went through but the person didn't immediately pick up.
Once, twice. On the third ring, the sound of the call getting answered was heard. It's me.
Director Jung Minjong. Ellipsis. You must have heard the results of the meeting by now, right? The person didn't reply. Yun Seahui continued talking in a cheerful voice. I'm sorry for you. But I want you to know that I did my best since I've also decided to take off my uniform with you.
Yun Seahui tilted her head. She stuck her phone between her shoulder and her cheek while taking out a new cigarette. Anyways, I'd like you to take responsibility along with me since things turned out this way. Responsibility? The person finally spoke. Yun Seahui smiled and flicked on the lighter. Yes. Please be sure you take responsibility for this incident. After emphasizing it again, Yun Seahui realized something and slowly corrected herself. I'm telling you because you might misunderstand, but I'm not telling you to touch Sol Jihu, okay? Yes. A heavy voice rang out after a long silence. I get exactly what you mean. And for the first time, Yun Seahui's face blossomed into a smile. She liked the people that she worked with for a long time. They understood what she meant, no matter how vaguely she explained it. Yun Seahui ended the call. She rolled her eyes a full circle before tapping a new number. But after 2 rings, she suddenly ended the call. I feel indignant enough handing over everything like this. So you should do this yourself, shouldn't you, Seora? Grinning like a naughty child, she got up from her seat. She drew the curtains back and pressed her face against the window. I want to see. The window fogged up before quickly clearing up again. Your face being distorted while you're on your knees in regret. I want to see it. If I can't have it, then trying to destroy doesn't seem to. Quietly whispering to herself, Yun Seahui giggled. Then she slowly raised her eyes. The quiet streets were illuminated under faint light. And the cold Sinyang building was swallowed in the darkness that towered above and stared down at her. 1. Officedel is a multi-purpose building with both residential and commercial units unique to Korea. Google it for more information, if interested. Chapter 408. Hugh. Sung Shi-hyun woke up with a start. He looked around with frightened eyes and saw his room, his bed, and the succubus lying next to him, in the said order, all shrouded in darkness. Sung Shi-hyun stared down at the succubus with mixed feelings. A year ago, he tried to retaliate against vulgar chastity for using him as a shield, but forgave her when she proposed to offer him an infinite supply of succubi every night.
So last night, he picked a girl who suited his taste exactly.
Her name. He had heard it but forgotten it already. All he knew about her was that she used to be an earthling, and a quite famous one at that, just like himself, before vulgar chastity captured her and depraved her. When his thoughts reached that point, Sung Shi-hyun finally realized that the nightmare was over and dropped his head. Fuck. It's that shitty dream again.
With a heavy sigh, he scratched his sweaty, damp hair. Sung Shi-hyun had been having nightmares lately, or more precisely, since the day the parasite queen showed him outer space.
He didn't know who the man in his dream was. He couldn't even make out his face.
What he remembered of the man was his pitch-black armor, crimson cape, and the bladeless sword. Sung Shi-hyun chewed his lips. Fear swept over him again as he recalled the sight of the man slowly rising to his feet, pressing his palms against the armrest of his throne surrounded by women. The man approached Sung Shi-hyun slowly, step by step. The pressure he felt then that made him shiver still lingered inside him.
Damn. Fucking hell.
Sung Shi-hyun tried to calm his breathing before suddenly grabbing the succubus arm and pulling her towards him.
The succubus opened her eyes halfway and looked up, still drowsy from sleep.
Then she extended her arms towards Sung Shi-hyun like she was used to this sort of treatment.
He felt better when the warm flesh touched him. Fuck, stop showing up in my dreams. Adults shouldn't meddle in kids' affairs. Let kids play with other kids.
Sung Shi-hyun mumbled to himself and then lay back on the bed.
Brightest star. He wrapped his arms around the succubus with an alluring scent and looked up at the ceiling.
His eyes began to burn with jealousy and envy.
No freaking way.
Sung Shi-hyun's lips distorted.
I'm the main character of Paradise. I'm the protagonist,
he said as if to reassure himself, and then closed his eyes and attempted to go back to sleep.
Suddenly, the door burst open.
Sung Shi-hyun's face crumpled in an instant.
Arg, who is it?
He sat up, and the succubus who had just opened his door quickly knelt before him.
I am sorry.
Didn't I say I'm too tired lately for a threesome?
No, that's not why I.
There's an important message from my lord to the First Army commander.
From vulgar chastity?
Sung Shi-hyun crossed his arms with a snort.
All right, speak. And if it's trivial, you'd better get ready for punishment. In bed, of course. The succubus trembled in fear.
Yes, well, humanity is. She did her best to convey the message succinctly because she knew how sadistic and perverted Sung Shi-hyun was in bed. As her voice continued, the expression on Sung Shi-hyun's face changed from annoyance to confusion. Sin-young, collapsed?
Yes.
Not entirely, of course, but now they're tied to Valhalla through a contract, and their director is due to resign soon. Leave. Sung Shi-hyun commanded and the succubus bowed her head and left in a hurry.
Sung
Shi-hyun brooded over the news that the succubus had just delivered. He looked unusually serious. That yun bitch is withdrawing.
The yun bitch. Unbelievable.
Sung Shi-hyun tilted his head to the side. That's amazing if it's true.
I didn't think that crazy bitch knew how to give up. He mumbled in a bitter voice, and
Sol Ji-hoo.
I won't deny you're special, but you're too soft.
He smiled.
You should have killed her when the chance came.
Why did you let her live? The Yun Seahui that Sung Shi-hyun knew couldn't be trusted.
He never knew when she would turn against him. He'll learn when he gets stabbed in the back like me.
There's no way that Yun bitch will go down like this. What should I do? Sung Shi-hyun licked his lips. Part of him wanted to watch Yun Seohui's plan unfold, but nevertheless he didn't think it would succeed. After witnessing the brightest star, he couldn't think otherwise.
That star wouldn't fall easily. Perhaps.
This could be their chance. The last chance to strike before humanity finishes regrouping and fully unites with the Federation.
The thought suddenly struck him. Sung Shi-hyun quickly organized his thoughts and stormed out of the room.
He exited the building and stomped towards the imperial palace where the parasite queen resided.
I've been waiting for you.
Their meeting took place quickly. The parasite queen sat on the corrupted throne as usual and looked down at Sung Shi-hyun kneeling down on one knee. Are you feeling better? Yes, I feel a whole lot better.
Thank you for your concern.
Does that mean you're ready to talk now? That's right.
I realized I have no time to be wasting. You must have heard the news.
You may rise. With the queen's permission, Sung Shi-hyun slowly rose from the floor.
He looked at the parasite queen, resting her chin on her hands, and smiled bitterly. First of all, I'd like to thank your majesty for showing me that scene from the other day. Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket.
The truth is, the last time you summoned me, I was going to tell you not to worry about the brightest star, that I would kill Sol Jihu for you.
I might as well have raised the death flag.
Death flag? Yes. It's something that appears frequently in animes or movies. A character, usually a villain, says or does something with extreme confidence only to end up as a stepping stone for the main character's growth. The parasite queen didn't recognize the concept at all, but she roughly understood its meaning through the expressions, stepping stone, and main character's growth.
I'm glad your arrogance has subsided. She sounded content.
How could she not be?
The only star that could rival the brightest star finally began to confront his opponent seriously. Why is she so afraid of one human?
That was what I thought before I saw what I saw. Now my thoughts have taken a 180 degrees turn and changed completely. Now I think, why did she leave him alone for so long? Sung Shi-hyun continued.
So I looked into it, and… well, I guess you did do something. For example, there was the Arden Valley War, he added.
He could easily guess that even for the queen, it came as a surprise that a level 4 warrior survived the battle against 3 army commanders and even eliminated Undying Diligence.
I see you've given him some attention. However,
after some review of the sequence of events, I think I know why you've been losing to him for the last few years.
Oh. So before I start, I have 2 questions I'd like to ask you.
May I?
Some might consider his attitude rude.
Instead of getting angry, however, the parasite queen raised her head and observed the sky.
When she saw Sung Shi-hyun's star, a corner of her mouth curled up. You may.
The parasite queen extended her arm towards Sung Shi-hyun.
I give you permission to speak your mind freely.
From now on, you may speak whatever you wish to speak without worrying about the consequences. Thank you for your generosity. Sung Shi-hyun bowed lightly and began to speak.
Then I'll ask right away. First, am I right to assume that your divinity has been greatly damaged? Yes.
Why haven't you recovered?
Those who injured my divinity were quite thorough in their work. The parasite queen smiled at Sung Shi-hyun. There was nothing I could do then, and our victory seemed certain even without my divinity. So I thought I'd recover it later.
There was nothing wrong with what the parasite queen had said.
Of course, they both knew the phrase, that was before Sol Jihu appeared, had been omitted. Alright, I'll take that answer.
Sung Shi-hyun nodded. Secondly, I think you knew from the moment the brightest star appeared that what you just said might not work out as planned.
I did, but didn't know it would get this bad.
If you knew, then why didn't you give up on other things? What? The parasite queen's eyes widened.
She had not expected this question.
Now that I have your permission to speak frankly, I'll do just that.
Your Majesty, you've been trying to grab more than you can handle.
Sung Shi-hyun cleared his throat. The parasites are indeed powerful, but you've been dispersing our troops in every important war.
On the other hand, humanity, no, the brightest star, has confronted us with all his might every time. Opening square bracket ellipsis closing square bracket.
Of course, as I said before, I don't think you did it on purpose. Perhaps you were gathering forces to avenge those who defeated you in the past, or perhaps your intention was to bring this planet under your control as quickly as possible.
Opening square bracket ellipsis closing square bracket.
Certainly, if you had succeeded, the Federation and humanity would be long gone by now. If you had succeeded, that is.
Sung Shi-hyun slowly raised his head and looked up at the parasite queen. But in the end, you failed, and that's why we're in this mess.
The parasite queen listened to him, feeling somewhat refreshed. Sung Shi-hyun shook his head with a serious look, an expression that he didn't usually wear.
You can't do that from now on. Even lions go all out when hunting rabbits, and our opponent is no longer an ordinary rabbit. He's a super rabbit. Do you mean to say that we should change our main target to humanity? Not at all. I see you still haven't rid yourself of greed.
Then what do you mean?
Forget about the Federation and humanity.
You have to focus on getting rid of the brightest star first, no matter what happens.
The parasite queen let out a long sigh. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about it before. She had, but just didn't know how to make it happen. I suppose you're aware of what's been happening to humanity these days. Yes. And that things will get more complicated in the future if we just let them be. I would assume so.
That means we have to attack the brightest star before the change he's leading is complete.
No matter how strong the wind of change may be, it will scatter when the force holding it together disappears.
But how? Their exchange continued, and
now, let's get back on track.
Sung Shi-hyun finally got to the point.
We have to drag him out.
Drag him out?
Yes.
To be honest, all the brightest star has to do now is wait. Because if he can just let this moment pass, a bright future awaits him. The Federation is currently in the process of integrating into humanity, so he won't budge until that migration is complete. But we shouldn't attack him recklessly.
A hasty decision is likely to lead to a repeat of the Arden Valley War or the Tiggle Fortress War. And then, the brightest star will surely grow beyond our control.
Ho! The parasite queen gave a short exclamation of surprise.
Sung Shi-hyun had accurately identified her concerns.
Suddenly, she felt glad to have shown that scene to the First Army commander. His prudence seemed to hint at the existence of a sure solution to their problems. The parasite queen sank into contemplation. So far Sung Shi-hyun had centered all of his talk around one person. Upon reflection, she could see where he was going with this. Abandon greed, drag the enemy out, and then.
Do you mean to say that we should lure him with bait? I wouldn't call it that. Sung Shi-hyun shrugged.
From now on, every move we make must come after careful planning and consideration. One small mistake can be fatal. This meant they only had one chance. It was then that the parasite queen finally realized Sung Shi-hyun's true intention.
I see.
Whether we succeed or fail to drag him out, our plan needs to benefit us.
Correct.
That's why bait isn't enough.
We need something that will definitely capture his attention, something that will make him want to run to us. Something that will capture his attention.
Something, for example, that could destroy or at least greatly harm the changes he has brought about.
Ha! Do you really think such a thing exists? Of course.
Sung Shi-hyun grinned. Come to think of it.
You descended on the battlefield during the Tiggle Fortress War a year ago, right? He continued in a secretive whisper. I thought it was a bad move back then, but now that I think about it, it could be used to our advantage.
The parasite queen's eyes narrowed. Just think about it.
You ruled this entire planet in the past. If the news spreads that you've regained your power.
Never mind the Federation, but what would humanity, who's just beginning to grow, think of the situation?
I told you, there's nothing I can do at this point. But now I am with you.
So why are you so worried? Sung Shi-hyun put his hand over his chest with a grin. One of the three heroes who forced you to sit on that throne is here. Does that mean? The parasite queen leaned forward from her throne.
Chapter 409.
You know the Steel's whereabouts? The parasite queen revealed an unprecedented interest.
No, not exactly.
Sung Shi-hyun shook his head.
From what I found out after I turned to the parasites.
Well, I'm sure your majesty knows where one of them is hidden.
Including the one that I hid, we know the location of 2 of the stels. Sung Shi-hyun raised his index finger and middle finger before continuing with a but. Unfortunately, we don't know where the last stele is. I know it's not in the territory of the Federation or humanity, but I wasn't told anything more. But there's a way to find out. We would have to use a little bit of force though.
The parasite queen listened to Sung Shi-hyun without missing a single word. Though she had her eyes closed, her mind was making calculations at a frightening speed.
Was it possible or impossible? Should it be done or should it be not? It's simple, really.
Sung Shi-hyun continued.
If we succeed in baiting out the brightest star?
Then we'll drop everything we're doing and solely focus on just attacking him.
Even if he is under the protection of this world, he should not be able to survive the onslaught of the parasite's whole force. On the other hand. But what if we fail to bait him out? Though it would be a shame, it's still not too bad because the parasites would still have gained something. Something that swept away the past era's empire, or kingdom, and other nations and races. Sung Shi-hyun paused and rolled his eyes in a circle. Actually, we don't even need to go that far back. Your Majesty wiped out half of the Allied forces at Tiggle Fortress by unleashing divinity thrice. So imagine how they would react. Even I'm dying to know. Now that you mention it. The parasite queen smiled furtively after having listened quietly. Even I am greatly tempted by the prospect. I don't want to give up either one. Ah, please, greedy queen. Sung Shi-hyun dropped his hands in an exaggerated manner. Pick one. Just one. Do you want to chase after 2 rabbits again only to catch none? I know how tempting it is, but didn't you already experience it once during the Tiggle Fortress War? Unexpected factors are bound to come into play this time around as well, so let's just focus on doing one thing. The parasite queen chuckled at Sung Shi-hyun's rather adorable grumbling. Her mood, which had hit rock bottom just yesterday, was gradually going up. It was because she felt like talking to Sung Shi-hyun was broadening the parasite's future. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Sung Shi-hyun spread out his arms. Whether this plan is worth carrying out, and which of the 2 we will focus on if we do, will depend on your Majesty's judgment. He then bowed down like a magician bowing before his audience. After Sung Shi-hyun left, the parasite queen became lost in thought for a long time in the empty grand hall. What Sung Shi-hyun said wasn't wrong. Humanity was currently advancing toward a better future. She had to nip the bud before the change properly set in. In truth, the parasites had to make a move now. Rather than this being the ideal time, it was because they already expended a lot of time recovering their forces. Thinking in this way, Sung Shi-hyun's offer wasn't so bad. In fact, it was quite excellent. It was a low-risk, high-return plan. The problem was deciding which rabbit to catch. Oh yes, let me say just one more thing before I go. If your Majesty chooses the first option, you will have to be very careful with how to eliminate the brightest star. You must know that Earthlings can revive once using a divine wish. If he dies without being corrupted or commits suicide after being captured, our efforts would have been for nothing. If we choose to kill him, we need to make sure he dies completely. We need to make it so that he won't be able to do anything even if he revives. Is it possible? Yes, of course. I know the weak point of the Earthling's revival clause. Recalling Sung Shi-hyun's words, the parasite queen slowly opened her eyes. She then came to the decision. Although the offered plan is a little vague, it can be a huge success depending on how it's carried out. That said, she didn't order Sung Shi-hyun to outline a detailed plan. Their next attack would be a different method than the frontal breakthrough approach they had been using. Moreover, as the parasite's future rested on its outcome, she wanted to devote her own time into perfecting the plan. And just now, she had completed the plan. The parasite queen immediately summoned the Third Army commander.
"I've come, my dear queen." After hurrying into the grand hall, the black-hooded army commander bowed respectfully. The third army commander, Abhorrent Charity, was a necromancer. To be more precise, he was an archlik, once a powerful magician who desired immortality, laying his hands on necromancy and transforming into an undead. As he pursued the path of the mana for hundreds of years, he was familiar, not only with necromancy but with all types of magic. "The reason I have called you here today is to ask you for a favor." "A favor?"
"Your command is my wish, my dear queen."
"Then I will be frank."
The parasite queen nodded and then spoke. "Prepare a surprise attack."
"Pardon?" Abhorrent Charity looked taken aback as if he had not expected such an order. The surprise attack, mentioned by the parasite queen, meant using a large-scale teleportation spell to force oneself into the heart of the enemy. With the enemy having the defender's advantage, it would naturally come at a huge risk.
Teleport.
This powerful spell allowed for instantaneous, long-distance travel, but it also came with many restrictions. The distance traveled depended on the mana of the spellcaster and the volume and mass of the teleporting matter. For example, take the parasite's whole force and teleport to humanity's capital would be too difficult a task for even Abhorrent Charity, who was familiar with magic and obtained a level of existence of a demigod.
"I assume you don't mean for me to go alone. Take 3 other army commanders and their armies. And the distance from where you are standing right now to Scheherazade. Is it possible?" "To Scheherazade?"
Abhorrent Charity gasped.
It was not an easy task at all.
However, the third army commander fell into thought without complaining. In truth, given the effectiveness of a surprise attack using teleport, he had brought up this idea several times in the past. However, the parasite queen had held off on the idea back then for a few different reasons. The biggest reason was just how much risk it carried.
A large-scale teleportation required a long time in both its activation stage and the actual movement stage.
If they teleported to the middle of Tiggle Fortress and became the focal point of a barrage of thunders, they would just be a laughingstock of the whole world. So, they had to launch the surprise attack without the enemy finding out to maximize its effectiveness, but even this would only be a one-time thing. Unless their enemy were fools, they would prepare for another surprise attack after the first time, and this meant the risk of teleporting would only get higher. And so, the parasite queen had put off the plan of using long-distance teleportation, keeping it hidden for when it became necessary.
And today, the parasite queen mentioned this hidden card.
Abhorrent Charity thought for a long time before replying.
"It is not possible as of now. To make it possible with those conditions, I need 4 things." 4. That is quite a lot. Speak. "The first is the 7th Army Commander's assistance." "That will be easy."
The 7th Army Commander, Twisted Kindness, was a member of the dragon race.
With her profound knowledge of magic, she should be able to shoulder Abhorrent Charity's burden.
The second, though only an assumption, is that I can only bring 3 or 4 army commanders with me at most.
And among them, the 1st Army Commander and 7th Army Commander must be included. I shall allow it.
Song Shi-hyun and Twisted Kindness had fully absorbed their divinity and thus did not command their own armies. That was to say, Abhorrent Charity would only be able to teleport 3 armies at most.
The third is that my capabilities are limited. It will be difficult for me to use such a massive spell in my current state. I shall permit the release of your divinity. The parasite queen gave her permission easily, but Abhorrent Charity smiled bitterly on the inside. He had only just finished recuperating from the aftermath of the Tiggle Fortress War, but it seemed like he would be resting again soon. The fourth, I'm ashamed to say, is that the success of the spell is uncertain even with the other 3 conditions being met. And so, I will need magic circles to help lessen the burden. Not only at the starting location, but also at the destination.
You don't have to worry about that.
The parasite queen spoke. There is someone to help you at both the starting location and the destination. Pardon.
Abhorrent Charity muttered confusedly and then did a double take. "Ah! We do have a link in Scheherazade."
Foo.
The parasite queen chuckled faintly.
Now then,
"I will tell you the starting location, the destination, and when to launch the surprise attack."
please. First.
The parasite queen revealed her plan at last. Then, seemingly having heard something absurd, Abhorrent Charity suddenly raised his lowered head. Pardon? The more the parasite queen spoke, the more dazed Abhorrent Charity became.
Then. Quiet. Do you understand? Yes. Good. I will immediately summon the army commanders again, so you should make preparations so that all goes according to plan.
Your humble servant accepts your command. Abhorrent Charity bent his waist all the way and then hurriedly left the grand hall.
The parasites began to move again at last. Secretly and stealthily, without the Federation and humanity knowing. Asterisk.
The carriage holding Valhalla's members arrived in Eva. And before they even went back to Valhalla's building, Sol Jihu got a call.
It was to deliver the news that all employees had finished signing the contract.
They sure work fast. They better if they want to live.
It would have been better if they did it earlier. Everyone chattered loudly and in a good mood while entering through the main entrance. Phi Sora, who walked at the front, suddenly came to a stop. A little chick with 2 feathers sticking out of its head was dozing off in the middle of the garden while basking under the sunlight. Shush. Phi Sora looked back at everyone and put up a finger to her mouth.
As others looked at her curiously, she grinned and slowly approached the peacefully napping little chick.
Foos tilde.
After bending down a little and taking a deep breath. Rodaaaaaaaaaaah.
She screamed. Piak. Little chick spread its wings and flew up in a startle before stumbling back down and rolling over.
Boisterous laughter burst out. What the heck?
Little chick shook its head and then made a dazed face after seeing the cackling Valhalla members.
It then saw Phi Sora, who was cracking up, and glared at her. You dare! It raised its tiny beak, flying up like a butterfly and stinging her knee like a bee.
Ow!
You wanna die? You wanna die?
Sorry. My bad. Phi Sora fell on her butt laughing and then wrapped her arms around her knees.
You were just too cute dozing off in the garden.
What a load of a bull.
Just when I thought things were getting quiet thanks to those guys. It was then.
Keying. PFFT. The fuzzballs that were strolling through the garden eating grass laughed mockingly. Little chick blinked.
Is this funny?
Keying.
What's so funny, huh? Little chick asked threateningly.
Key. Ha 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 ha. The fuzzballs burst out laughing simultaneously.
The 6 of them rolled left and right like they were about to die of laughter.
Why, you little. Little chick trembled.
You little bastards. It then screamed and burst into a brilliant light. It grew in size in an instant, and a strange bird with a giraffe's long neck and a deer's slender body spread its wings. Little chick had transformed into a phoenix.
I dare you buggers to laugh again. Swinging its head to the side, it saw Hugo slamming his fist on the ground, laughing. It craned its long neck and bit down on his head. You walk? Hugo's legs flailed around in the air as he went upside down inside the phoenix's beak.
I'll eat you. I'll swallow you whole.
Aw!
Why me?
Shut it. I hate you the most. Someone help. All chaos broke loose in the garden. Sol Jihu gazed at his comrades, screaming and running away, with an expressionless face. While everyone seemed to be having fun, he could not laugh. There were just too many things on his mind to be blindly optimistic about the future. I'm jealous. Sol Jihu quietly closed his eyes as he watched the phoenix spit out Hugo and chase after Phi Sora.
He couldn't help but wish he could laugh like them without any worry. But as his position rose and he gradually got more work to do, laughter disappeared from his face. When was the last time he relaxed and laughed freely?
He who wishes to wear the crown must bear its weight.
Remembering the words Ian told him long ago, Sol Jihu let out a short sigh. The phoenix succeeded in punishing Phi Sora at last and then stopped while on its way to look for the fuzzballs. Before he noticed, the 6 fuzzballs were huddled behind Sol Jihu's leg, trembling.
"Hey, you!
You're supposed to be my partner, so how can you?" The phoenix trailed off in the middle of yelling at him. Sol Jihu, who was standing still, didn't have a good expression. In fact, it could even be described as menacing. The phoenix stared fixedly at Sol Jihu before cancelling its transformation and returning to its chick form. "Are you alright?"
It trotted up to him and asked.
Sol Jihu laughed blandly. "You could transform? Can't you see this?"
Little Chick raised its wing and pointed at its forehead. A bright orange feather and an indigo feather. Sol Jihu blinked his eyes. The first one was green. The next 2 were yellow and blue. Now it's orange and indigo. So the next 2 are red and violet?
You only just noticed it? Since when could you evolve? Since the Spirit Realm expedition.
Little Chick spoke calmly. I used up the Spirit King's energy that the nest stole back then, but I stored the nest's energy separately. While you were out training, I took my time to digest them little by little.
Sol Jihu nodded his head. Born under the blessing of chastity, the Arcus spirit had an innate purification ability, and it could feed on any kind of evil creatures and use their energy as nutrients. Since it consumed 5 pinnacle rank nests and Sol Jihu himself had fed it quite a lot of holy power, it should have helped his growth tremendously.
Infancy, youth, adolescence, adulthood.
You're in the adolescent stage right now, right?
How close are you to reaching adulthood? Feed me more holy power. Little Chick said firmly. Sol Jihu chuckled and reached out his hand. Let's go.
Oh, really?
Little Chick hopped up to his palm with joy.
You always pushed it off, saying it was wasteful. Now you're doing it right away? What gives? I have a business at the temple anyway.
Plus.
Sol Jihu closed his mouth without finishing the thought, because I think something is going to happen soon.
He didn't feel like it was the right thing to say, given that it was only his feeling. And so, he placed Little Chick on his shoulder and quietly turned to leave. Asterisk. Sol Jihu filled Little Chick up with holy power as soon as he arrived at Gyula's temple.
After watching Little Chick stroking its bulging belly with a satisfied face, he slowly looked up at the statue.
Gyula Nim. He stood straight in thought in his head. You must have read the question that is on my mind by now. Opening square bracket ellipsis dot closing square bracket. I was given the trial to become the apostle of Gyula, and by wrapping up the matter with Sinyoung a few days ago, I wrapped up the plan I initially came up with. Opening square bracket ellipsis dot closing square bracket. So I want to ask. Calming the heart that was pounding with nervousness. At the point in time. Sol Jihu asked the question that he continuously thought of on his way back. Can you say that humanity has changed? Sol Jihu swallowed his saliva and awaited Gyula's response. After a short silence, Gyula's unique languid voice echoed in his head. Chapter 410. Through a series of events, you have obtained a written oath from the leading organizations of Paradise. You have also identified and removed some of the traitors in Paradise. In addition, you helped the royal family gain the authority to manage the settings of Earthlings. I acknowledge that you have used the above 3 methods to forcefully change the Earthlings to some extent. Gyula's voice paused for a moment. However, the voice continued with a sigh. Those who have changed are only a fraction of the total. Humanity still bears a grave problem. Because it has a problem, it isn't perfect. Because it isn't perfect, the change isn't complete. Therefore, you have yet to pass the trial to become my apostle. Her words were like a death sentence to him.
Sol Jihu shut his eyes.
He had hoped his premonition would prove false.
But Gyula's declaration just now only proved him right.
What drove him even more crazy was that he had no idea what went wrong. So,
what more do I need to do?
Opening square bracket ellipsis closing square bracket.
How close am I to the problem?
Opening square bracket ellipsis closing square bracket. There was no response from Gyula.
But Sol Jihu didn't mind, because he had never expected one from the start. Because of the principle of causality, the seven sins were unable to interfere freely in this world where the parasite queen had become the chief deity. If Gyula suggested a way to solve the existing problem, the parasites would gain something in return for it. Just like how the parasites' invasion of paradise caused earthlings to be summoned and the fallen angels to emerge. Such an annoying law, Sol Jihu thought to himself.
You were close in terms of physical distance.
This was the best she could tell him.
Physical distance. Sol Jihu let out a chuckle.
So it could have been one of the thousands of people he had passed on the street.
I'm sorry.
Sol Jihu shook his head. He knew Gyula wasn't doing this on purpose. He could only blame the former chief deity for getting devoured by the invaders.
I understand.
Sol Jihu bowed and then left with Little Chick.
Asterisk. Hey, Bouncy. Sol Jihu spoke to Little Chick as he walked out of Gyula's temple. When do you think you'll be able to unlock the Spear of Purity to its fourth stage? Little Chick, who was standing on Sol Jihu's shoulder picking at his down, glanced sideways.
I don't know.
It crossed its wings and tilted its head.
First tell me why you suddenly brought this up.
I thought you haven't been paying much attention to it lately. I think I might need it soon. Need it? Little Chick tilted its head and smacked its beak. I'm not sure.
As you know, I'm a spirit born under the protection of castitas, one of the seven virtues.
As a pursuer of everything good and orderly.
Judging from your recent moves, I can't help but hesitate.
In regards to the current situation,
do you consider yourself good and lawful?
No. Not at all.
Sol Jihu immediately shook his head. Him, good and lawful?
That was enough to make a cat laugh.
I'm glad if that's what you really think.
Anyway, in my opinion, you're hardly neutral.
If I had to be completely honest, I'd say you lean towards chaotic evil.
Little Chick continued. To control evil by evil.
Considering the situation in paradise, which is dominated by the seven sins, I guess that could be a valid method.
So I'm going to wait before I make up my mind.
Until when? Until I see for myself the consequences of your actions and the changes they bring.
It was rare for him to present such accurate standards.
Sol Jihu was surprised.
In the past, whenever Sol Jihu brought up this topic, Little Chick used to get angry, saying he was expecting more than he deserved.
So why the sudden change?
I see your standards have become quite generous. Wasn't ability also an important factor in the evaluation?
Well, that's...
One of Little Chick's eyes slowly widened. In terms of ability, you could probably breeze through 2 stages right now.
Really?
You've suffered enough on the path of the soul and cultivated yourself with a discipline that befits the 4th and 5th stage.
So I'm not worried about your skills.
Little Chick snorted.
The truth is, when I saw you for the first time after you passed the trial, I debated with myself over whether or not to unlock the 4th stage.
I'm sure you won't let the Spear of Purity shake you now. In short, his ability was sufficient, but his character left much to be debated.
Sol Jihu nodded. Somehow he felt better knowing that. That's right. He couldn't just sit idly by and watch everything he'd built up so far go to waste.
The goal was clear. All he had to do now was try his best to achieve that goal.
He swore to himself to break all the traps the enemy had laid out, as he had done so far.
Slap. Sol Jihu slapped himself to snap out of it. All right.
Let's go.
Full of determination, He began to descend the stairs.
After the meeting with Sinyoung, everything happened in a flash.
When the best organization finally succumbed, others rushed to cooperate with Valhalla. Oder and Harem were the first cities to accept Valhalla's terms and open their borders to the Federation.
Their quick response prompted representative organizations in other cities to take action as well. Caligos Pax and Grazia's Wu Lei, the Star of Wrath, visited Eva to talk to Valhalla, although the latter wasn't directly related to the attack incident. The royal families of each city had no reason to resist the change. One of the conditions requested by the Federation was the authority to supervise the settings of Earthlings, which, if accepted, would give the royal families enormous power. So all the royal families, except Scheherazade's, used the royal oath and began preparing to welcome the immigrants.
Everything was going smoothly. Except for one thing.
Sinyoung had been faithfully implementing the terms of the contract, delivering signed oaths and withdrawing its branches from other cities, but made a small mistake regarding Jung Minjong's extradition. Sinyoung first removed Jung Minjong from his post and then summoned him to paradise, but he refused to comply.
So they tried to transfer him by force when the police suddenly rushed in and took him away.
It turned out that he had asked one of his acquaintances to report him missing. Usually, it took time for the investigation to begin after the initial report, but the way the police intervened almost immediately made Sol Jihu think it was a premeditated scheme on part of Jung Minjong. Yun Seahui informed Sol Jihu that Sinyoung was contacting the police and asked for his understanding.
Other than that, everything was under easy sail.
It's lively.
Sol Jihu stood on the rooftop of Valhalla's building and looked down at the city. He saw a few Earthlings provide beer and towels to the dwarves busy repairing the castle wall. In the middle of the main road, there was a cave fairies shop bustling with Earthling customers looking at displayed items or bargaining prices with the shop owner. Wherever his gaze landed, the Federation and humanity had mingled together. Eva was flourishing more than ever. Sol Jihu smiled as he watched the little fuzzballs out on the street wagging their tails at passers-by, awarding them with treats. The
next day, Sol Jihu opened his eyes at the crack of dawn. Today was the day he had decided he would return to Earth.
He hadn't been home for a long time because of everything that was going on in paradise. His mother and brother must be worried sick.
His plan was to contact them and meet with them as soon as he returned, then stay on Earth for a day or two for a change of pace.
Sol Jihu walked down the stairs to the first floor and stopped. Kim Hana stood by the entrance, looking at him. She seemed to have been waiting for him. "What's going on? It's still early. You said you were going to Earth today." "Yeah, that's what I said a few days ago. There's something I want to warn you about before you leave.
Also, I have a question for you."
Sol Jihu blinked in mild confusion.
The Kim Hana he knew wouldn't try to ambush him with a sudden question.
She would have just asked him straight up. So it seemed that she had stayed up all night wondering whether to ask him this question or not.
"What is it?
What's your relationship with Yun Seahui?"
That came out of nowhere. Sol Jihu frowned. "Relationship? What do you mean? Have you ever met or contacted her without my knowledge since you met at the cafe?"
This confused him even more. "No, not even once. I only met with Miss Yun Seora."
Sol Jihu shook his head. He felt slightly offended because her question seemed to accuse him of secretly dating Yun Seahui. "Why do you ask?"
"You see, I just don't understand why she acted as she did."
"You mean the attack?"
"No, the meeting." Kim Hana began with a sigh. "Do you remember what Yun Seahui said at the meeting? Her address, I mean."
"Address?
You're the representative of Valhalla and Yun Seahui is the representative of Sinyoung. And that meeting wasn't a personal meeting, it was an official meeting between the two representatives, attended by the members of each organization." She was right. But Yun Seahui, she…
How should I say this? It's like she spoke to you, not to all of Valhalla, as herself and not as Sin Young's representative. But she apologized to everyone at the end.
That was after everything was over.
Think about it carefully. Sol Ji-hoo searched through his memories.
I don't hate Valhalla.
If I really thought badly of you.
I admired you, representative of Valhalla,
for all the incredible achievements you made for the sake of paradise. I wanted to become your friend and help you in any way I could.
I apologize for the distress and the hurt the recent series of incidents have caused you, representative of Valhalla.
And I promise in the name of God in Vidya to faithfully fulfill the conditions set by Valhalla until your misunderstanding is resolved.
It did sound a little strange now that he thought about it. She had emphasized herself when she should have spoken for Sin Young, and Sol Ji-hoo when she should have mentioned Valhalla as a whole.
It might be nothing, but he couldn't help but suspect it was on purpose because Yun Seahui was the one who made these remarks. There's no way she could have made such a mistake.
I just think it's weird.
Kim Hannah clicked her tongue and then nodded her head.
Anyway, thanks for answering my question.
Be careful on Earth. We've done everything we can, but who knows? Sol Ji-hoo nodded quietly. See you later.
With that, he left the building. Once he arrived at the temple, Sol Ji-hoo stood in front of the warp gate.
He hesitated for a moment before taking out the tiny piece of paper he had received from a priest.
He clenched the paper in his fist so that he could tear it right away when needed.
After a moment of silence, Sol Ji-hoo took a deep breath and buried himself slowly into the portal.
Asterisk. Flash. Light exploded.
As soon as the scenery changed, Sol Ji-hoo ducked his head in a hurry. Tightening the grip of his hand holding the paper, he rolled across the floor and looked around busily. But nothing happened, and no one was nearby.
Quote.
Sol Ji-hoo got up from the floor with a cough.
That was new. He felt a little humiliated, but he only had one life. Only after he kicked open the closet door and peeped into the bathroom with his back against the wall was he finally able to relax. Let's see. What the? Why do I have so many unread texts? Sol Ji-hoo was shocked when he turned on his cell phone. There were at least a dozen missed calls and text messages. The most recent calls were from his mother and brother. In total, there were 12 records left. UK. I guess I've been gone for too long. He wouldn't be surprised if they reported him missing. Nervously, Sol Ji-hoo clicked on the call button. He heard the dial tone, but his mother didn't pick up. The same thing happened with his brother. He tried calling them again, but the calls went straight to the automated message announcing that they were unavailable. They're probably working right now. Sol Ji-hoo decided to wait a little longer and looked around the room. He didn't know what to do, so he turned on the TV and browsed the texts. There was a shooting in downtown Seoul last night. A police officer and a civilian were injured in the process of arresting the suspect. This is reporter Park Jo-hyun. A shooting? In Korea? Curious, Sol Ji-hoo was about to raise his head but stopped. As he had expected, most of the text messages came from Yun Seora. Oppa this is Seora. How are you? You said we should meet up. When can we meet? Can you give me a call if you get this message? I heard the news. Uni is resigning. Thank you. I'll do my best to help you from now on. By the way, what are you going to do to Seahui Uni? Sol Ji-hoo gave a light chuckle as he read the text messages one by one. I don't know what should I do? He muttered to himself and tapped on the arrow icon. They had promised to hang out a long time ago, but their meeting had yet to take place. Should I reply? He thought for a moment but decided to read the rest of the messages first. There could be one from his mother or his brother, after all. As Sol Ji-hoo slowly browsed through the text messages, his thumb suddenly stopped. There were quite a lot of texts from a number he had never seen before in his life, almost as many as Yun Seora's texts. Who is this? Led by curiosity, he tapped on one of them.
Jihu Oppa. This is Seora. Sol Jihu's face immediately stiffened. Ignore all the calls and texts from my old number.
Even if that number pretends to be me, you shouldn't trust it. This number belongs to someone I know and trust. From now on, I'll only contact you with this number. Oppa. If you get this text, return to that place immediately.
Don't call this number or my old number, just to be safe.
I know it's confusing, but please do as I say. I was going to explain it beforehand, but I couldn't get in touch with you.
I'll tell you everything later. Don't worry about Earth.
I'll think of something.
Hurry up and leave, Oppa. After Sol Jihu read the last message, he immediately scrolled up through the texts. He reread the texts from Yun Seora's original number. Sol Jihu's face began to tremble as he compared the messages from the two numbers. What the hell?
He suddenly felt goosebumps all over his body. Who was he supposed to trust?
It was then.
Buzz. Buzz.
His cell phone began to vibrate violently.